Chapter 121, Timing Game. What is it? Jihu asked nervously, and Kazuki slowly opened his mouth. I can't find Jun. Sakamoto Jun? Kazuki nodded as he puffed out white smoke. There are 40 staircases in total. Assuming each labyrinth had 8 people, that means at least 320 participated in this year's banquet. As the end of his sentence trailed off, his expression turned more and more sour. 36 teams made it up so far, so 288 people should be here. Right, but they might have... I know. But don't you think it's too harsh for only 165 people to have made it up here? Jihu swallowed his saliva. Over half of the participants had perished or had been eliminated in Stage 1. There are still 4 teams left. I can only hope he's just been eliminated. Kazuki smiled bitterly before asking for another cigarette. In response, Jihu dazedly handed him the entire pack. Anyways, I heard you did well. The second team to make it up here, right? Who told you that? An archer named Lara Wolf. She was praising you so much that I began to worry her tongue would dry up. Kazuki seemed to have gone around to exchange information the moment he came up. Jihu silently regretted just sitting around and doing nothing. Meanwhile, Kazuki glanced at the youth and saw his complexion sink. Not really, the youth muttered in a gloomy voice. Kazuki tilted his head. From what he heard about the youth's feats, he should have no reason to feel dejected. Did something happen? Jihu hesitated for a long time. Then, leading people is really hard, huh? He finally let out the sigh he had been holding in. Things don't work out the way you want. To be honest, I can't even remember what I did. Kazuki must have been caught off guard as his eyes widened with a cigarette still hanging between his lips. However, that only lasted a moment. Yep. As the leader of Yumi Tsubaim, he couldn't help but agree with the youth's statement. You're right. It is hard. After all, you have to unite people who aren't like you and people who aren't like each other. Tough, huh? The reason Jihu was so troubled was that he didn't know what to do. He didn't have regrets. Not a single thought of I should have done this or I should have done that entered his mind. Because of this, he couldn't make any excuses. Even if he went back in time and restarted Stage 1 with the knowledge he had now, he wasn't confident in bringing about a result better than this one. Mr. Kazuki. There's something I want to say too. I'll consider it payment for this pack of cigarettes. Jihu confessed his frustrations at Kazuki, who was a well-respected leader. Perhaps the youth wanted someone to listen to him, agree with him, and offer some advice. Kazuki listened to the youth silently before saying, Maybe the clothes didn't fit you. Jihu tilted his head in confusion. If I were you, Kazuki continued immediately, I would have revealed my identity first. Why? There is value in the name Carpdeem, plus your name is a topic in itself. They might think I'm just being cocky. Only if you introduce yourself arrogantly. Depending on your attitude or the situation, things might have gone in a different direction. Kazuki snorted. The method you use to lead the 6 members of the group is persuasion, in other words, a gift of gab. Right? Words have different weights depending on who says them. The words of a famous, authoritative person are different than the words of a nameless brat. Kazuki muttered endlessly. And fame is the strongest card in your possession. What's wrong about using something you've built up fair and square? Jihu became speechless at Kazuki's logical reasoning. It's only a guess, but had you revealed your identity at the beginning, their attitude might have changed. At the very least, they wouldn't have looked down on you. Is that really the case? That's what I did. You need to know your value a bit more. Kazuki smirked as he saw the youth's look of disbelief. Well, despite me saying this, I don't think what you did was bad. Really? You said O'Rahi and the Viper, or rather Audrey Bassler, were in your party, right? Yes. With those two, well. Kazuki took a careful look around before speaking quietly. It wouldn't have been strange even if the team was torn to pieces. You did a good job just coming out in one piece. Jihu trembled, feeling like he just heard something terrifying. Do you know them? Of course. Kazuki's face seemed to say, how would I not know them? O'Rahi is a high ranker, but she was famous even before she became one. She has a few infamous tales, so look into them if you're curious. Can't you just tell me? You can just summarize them. Figuratively speaking, She has the battle prowess of the god of war, Zhao Yun, and the intelligence and political power of Sima Yi. Hearing Kazuki compare her to two of the most famous generals in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Xiao Jihu dropped his jaw. He asked, "How could there be such a cheat character?" However, Kazuki was dead serious. What about Audrey Bassler? She is someone I would never pick to be a member of my team." Kazuki spoke firmly. "If I were in your position, I would have either killed her or abandoned her. I wouldn't have considered any other option." "Why?" "Because my life could be in danger if I let her be." Xiao Jihu tilted his head, but when he remembered Snake Eye's color, he immediately agreed. Even as he was progressing through the labyrinth, he was more wary of Bassler than O'Rahi. "Still, to say you'd kill her. Isn't there a way to bring her along?" Xiao, Kazuki sighed. "I'm not a murderous psychopath. I'm not saying I would kill for no reason. However, I also don't think I'm wrong. Of course, that doesn't mean you're right. Since you managed to pull it off, I won't say you're soft either." Kazuki spoke sharply then. "But your method might have been the right one for stage 1. He muttered with a voice carrying a hint of regret. It was then. Ruffle, ruffle. The surroundings suddenly got noisy. 1. Kazuki doubted his eyes. On one of the remaining stairways, a long-haired man climbed up to the mountaintop. He seemed to be about 2 meters tall, and his stature was also huge. The problem was that he was plastered in blood. It was so much that even fresh blood was dripping down from the ends of his hair. His demon-like appearance made the surrounding people back off in shock. Furthermore, the moment the man climbed up to the mountaintop, the 40 pillars emitted brilliant beams of light. The beams all shot toward the middle before forming a cluster. Something was finally appearing above the empty mountaintop. In other words, a portal, huh? Stage 1 had officially ended. "Mr. Kazuki?" Xiao Jihu asked as he watched other people gather around the glimmering light in groups. "There's another thing I'm curious about. If it's just one, go ahead. What did you mean when you said the clothes didn't fit me?" "I meant you should take off your mask." Kazuki replied immediately. Mask. Xiao Jihu touched his face. What was Kazuki talking about? "What kind of a leader do I look like to you?" Hearing the sudden question, Xiao Jihu pondered before saying, "A cold, level-hearted leader who does everything that needs to be done." "Why do you think that?" Xiao Jihu didn't answer right away, but he had a reason for this assessment. Back in the rescue mission, Kazuki had found his younger sister after all sorts of hardships. However, he had cut her down without a shred of hesitation. This blade-like coldness left a powerful impression on Xiao Jihu, who was shaken quite a lot at the time. Just like how each individual differs, leaders have their own styles. "Right. You tried to lead people with words, but that wasn't the method that fit you. In my eyes, you're not the eloquent orator type or the cunning strategist type. No, you're more the instinctive type." He wore a calm expression, and his voice carried strength behind his words. "You should find a style that suits your nature. You know, wear the clothes that fit you." After saying this, Kazuki got up. The portal had been fully opened, and people were entering it one by one. "Nature?" "Yep. Do you remember when you shoved your spear at my neck on huge stone Rocky Mountain? That was, in my eyes." Kazuki twisted his body halfway and glanced back at the youth. "That state of madness you showed me is closer to your true self." He smirked and then walked towards the portal. "A style that suits my nature?" Xiao Jihu looked at his status window and made a troubled expression. A chaotic leader is a bit. He smacked his lips before standing up with his spear. Just as he was about to follow Kazuki, his chaotic mind suddenly became relaxed like a tranquil lake. It felt like the worries filling his head had all been washed away. It was a mystifying feeling. He had only exchanged a few words, but his body and mind had become more stable. Xiao Jihu came to realize something then. So this is why short-temper doesn't go away. One should never expect to get full with the first bite, and one needed more than pearls to make a necklace. Dylan and Kazuki couldn't have been well-respected leaders from the start. As Xiao Jihu was only 26 years old, expecting to be on the same level as them would be too greedy. Right. Xiao Jihu wasn't a full-fledged leader yet. He had only taken his first step. He had many things to experience and many things to learn. Today's failure would only be one of the countless failures of the future. When he thought about things this way, not only did he stop feeling so complicated, but even courage welled up inside him. In Stage 2, he didn't expect to be perfect, but he could try to do better by using the experience he gained from Stage 1 failure. Jihu tightened his grip around his ice spear. Then he confidently stepped towards the portal. His heart began to pound once again. The white light blocking his vision slowly dissipated. Jihu checked his surroundings the moment he opened his eyes. Thankfully, he wasn't separated from his teammates like in Stage 1. He could see both Cho-Hong and Hugo. This was surely good news, but he could also see over 100 others. 165, no, 166. After remembering the bloodied man who walked up at the end, Jihu slowly walked forward. He was about to sneak up to Cho-Hong and poke her side when he felt someone tug at the hem of his clothes. Glancing back, he saw Maria pulling on him. "Stay still." "Huh, the atmosphere is weird," Maria whispered. Jihu looked around the area once again. Indeed, something seemed off. He couldn't quite put it into words, but the air felt strangely heavy. Even Cho-Hong's eyes were gleaming with a cold light. It was the same with Hugo. Their usual cheerful appearances were nowhere to be seen, and they were staring blankly into the air with the eyes of a hunter searching for prey. Plus, they weren't the only ones like this. Everybody he saw seemed to be seriously infuriated, adding to the area's hostile atmosphere. It didn't take long for him to realize something must have happened during Stage 1. Wait, he remembered that he started to feel bad after Stage 1 ended. If he didn't vent his pent-up frustration by talking with Kazuki, he wouldn't have been any different than the people here. This place. When he activated his 9 eyes and looked around the area, he couldn't hide his shock. He was in a meadow, an open field where green grass gently swayed from a light breeze. All of the remaining 166 participants had been thrown into this vast plain. Of course, the grass wasn't the only thing here. At a spot close to where they were teleported, there were 2 large holes about 2 meters in diameter. They were about 10 meters away from each other, and a rectangular stone stele was standing between them. And above this stone stele was a familiar object, a giant hourglass. What is that? People who likewise finished surveying the area either approached the stone stele or watched it attentively. It was then, ding! An intense pain struck Jihu's head, similar to when he went through synchronization. Muffled groans rang out from the surroundings, but the strange phenomenon only lasted a moment. Jihu was pressing his temples when he realized that information he didn't have before was etched in his brain, and his eyes widened. Information was planted in my brain. Clearly, previously unknown information had been forced into everyone's brains. But as Jihu had experienced something similar before, he wasn't too taken aback. He closed his eyes and focused on the new information. 1. The Plaza of Sacrifice left. Activation condition. At least 6 people must enter. Difficulty. Static. Exit blocked once entered. Exit automatically opened once all enemies eliminated or no challengers remain. 2. The Plaza of the Dissonant Wish right. Activation condition. The activation of the Plaza of Sacrifice. Activated every time the Plaza of Sacrifice is activated. At most 6 people can enter, can acquire the Dissonant Wish. Stepping on the red portal on top of the altar will transport the challenger to Stage 3 or Paradise. Leaving through the exit will return them to Stage 2, 3. Miscellaneous. 10 people can enter Stage 3. Successfully defeating the Plaza of Sacrifice 20 times will permanently activate the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish and disable the entree limit. All can enter. After reading all the information available, Jihu muttered out, "God damn it." There were several conditions to worry about, but the general nuance of the stage seemed to lie on getting to the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. The question, of course, was how, frankly speaking, it was clear what these dirty conditions were trying to say. Tang. Suddenly, a harsh crashing sound rang out. The information was not finished. There was one condition left in the miscellaneous section. If the Plaza of Sacrifice is not activated before the hourglass's sand completely trickles down, a huge group of monsters will appear in the field. Jihu opened his eyes. He began to see sand falling from the overturned hourglass. Everyone's faces contorted viciously as they stared at the stone steel. A deadly silence ensued. SSSSS, while only the sound of sand trickling down rang out. Shouldn't we hurry inside? A voice from somewhere made everyone stare at each other. The timing game had begun the moment the sand began to fall. Chapter 122. Timing game 2. The sand fell down much quicker than Sial Jihu anticipated. No, it actually wasn't all that different from a normal hourglass. But because of the sudden turn of events, everything seemed more urgent. As the silence continued to stretch, everyone studied each other carefully. There wasn't a single person here who didn't understand the conditions. Every single one of them was on the lookout for any sort of change. A full minute went by as everyone stood idly. The sand had already fallen to the point where it was starting to be noticeable. Damn. Fuck. All sorts of grunts flowed out. People's contorted faces distorted even further to the point where they began to look like demons. The conditions were shitty enough by themselves, but there was even a time limit. Whoever created this stage had to be screwing with the participants on purpose. Otherwise, would they have needed to force the situation this much? In any case, about 1/10 of the sand had already trickled down. In other words, they had to make some sort of a decision in the next 9 minutes. Eventually, someone who wasn't able to stand the tension spoke up. Everyone go in. With a woman's shout as the starting point, the once silent plane became noisy. It says at least 6 people need to enter. There is no limit on the number of people that can enter. The woman was suggesting that everyone work together to conquer the Plaza of Sacrifice. It was the fairest method given the situation they were in. However, this argument was only agreeable on the surface. It was difficult to expect all 166 people to come to an agreement with the same intention. All of us going in is a bit. A man standing near the woman rubbed his chin. Only 6 people need to go in to activate the plaza. Wouldn't it be better to pick 6 people to enter the left pit and have others enter the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish? The man's argument was also reasonable. However, it was too idealistic. Then how are you going to select the 6 people to enter the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish? Well, the man tried to say something but stopped and blinked repeatedly. The woman clenched her teeth with an irritated look. That's not all. Perhaps because of her clenched teeth, a suppressed voice rang out. We know that the Plaza of Sacrifice has a static difficulty, but we won't know whether it's a 1 or a 100 until someone goes in. Unless someone wants to volunteer, it's fair for everyone to go in. So let's do that first. We'll need to confirm the difficulty before we can decide on anything. The man couldn't say anything at the woman's strong assertion. Although he found the idea difficult to swallow, he couldn't think of anything to say because the argument was logical. Then, we won't be going in. At that moment, another man spoke up. The woman frowned as she restlessly checked the hourglass. God damn it, can't you see that hourglass? We have to hurry. Why would we go in when we don't have a reason to? When the man didn't back down and fought back, the woman became stunned. What, you say you don't have a reason to go in? Yep, I and the 3 guys behind me came to quit after stage 2 anyways. The man spoke with commanding confidence. The 4 of us will return to paradise after getting the dissonant wish. We're not interested in stage 3 at all. The ones who can fight or join hands or whatever. That's none of our concern. He looked around to the left and right, and his 3 comrades nodded their heads in agreement. Some people also pitched in, agreeing with the man's sentiment. The man wasn't wrong in thinking this way either. After all, people had their own reasons for participating in the banquet. A vast majority of people wanted to get to stage 3 to obtain the harmonious wish, but there were quite a few who knew their place and wanted to stop after stage 2. As such, those who want to go to stage 3 can work things out and leave out the ones who want to quit after stage 2, was a valid argument. You're hilarious. Only if stage 2 exit was separate. O'Rahi stared at the man who announced non-participation with a mocking smile. You say that after reading the conditions. Are you boasting how retarded you are? Just like O'Rahi pointed out, for the man's argument to stand, the exit to paradise and stage 3 had to be separate. In addition, there had to be a way to monitor which exit one took. The problem was that neither of these requirements was satisfied. Stepping on the red portal on top of the altar will transport the challenger to Stage 3 or Paradise. Or was the keyword. Since there was no way to tell where the participant would end up after stepping on the red portal, the people who were aiming to enter Stage 3 would never just sit by. Interesting. How did a brainless monkey like you pass Stage 1? What did you say? O'Rahe's unique, condescending manner of speech enraged the man who was speaking triumphantly. Say that again, you motherfucking whore. Muttering with a grim face, he attempted to create a hostile atmosphere. However, ooh up. O'Rahe moved like the wind and blocked the man's mouth with her left hand. Whore, ooh up, she curled her fingers until the man's cheeks sunk in. Next, she slowly raised him into the air. A bizarre scene played out of a burly man being held up by a slender woman. What do you think you're? One of the man's comrades quickly took out his bow and arrow, but, clang, he couldn't finish his sentence either. O'Rahe's right hand moved like a bolt of lightning and sent his bow flying. The archer who was about to knock his arrow stared at the longsword in her right hand and became stunned. O'Rahe snorted as if she found them to be a joke before looking back up at the man in her left hand. If you're going to be shameless, be more subtle about it. Seeing you act so proud makes people angry. Ook. The man's struggling feet slowed down as if O'Rahe's glaring eyes had drained him of all energy. Do you want to shut up and enter? Or do you want to think again after I break your chin? When she released a little bit of her strength, the man became relieved of the terrifying pressure and could finally breathe again. He coughed a few times before barely managing to collect his breath. With a face stained with fury, he opened his mouth. You! Ah, whatever. O'Rahe grinned. A beast that doesn't listen just needs to be beaten a few times. She grabbed his face again before stomping toward the plaza of sacrifice and extending her arm above the pit. Go in there and wait, little doggy. MMMP, MMMMP, you sure know how to bark Tilda. The moment she let go, he would fall into the pit without a doubt. The man struggled desperately as if his life depended on it. However, O'Rahe remained unmoving. Sialjihu swallowed his saliva as he watched the man flail helplessly. Despite O'Rahe going so far, no one stepped up to stop her. The man's comrades only watched in a daze, and others who previously agreed with the man fell silent. O'Rahe couldn't be the strongest of the 166 people here. There had to be someone who could contend with her. But since there was no way an earthling of such caliber wasn't aiming for Stage 3, not stopping O'Rahe could be taken as a silent sign of agreement. Still, O'Rahe's status window, summon date, 2015. 09. 18, marking grade, bronze, sex/age, female/25, height/weight, 168.8 cm/54.2 kg. Current condition, healthy, class LV5. Imperial Chevalier, nationality, Korea Area 1. Affiliation, bloodline, alias, top graduate, cunt 1/killer, blue-eyed sword demon 3. Physical level, strength, high intermediate, endurance, low intermediate, agility, low high. Stamina, high intermediate, mana, intermediate, luck. High-low, remaining ability points 2, 4, abilities 1, innate abilities 0, 2, class abilities 6, heart and soul, high intermediate 3. Other abilities, 2. After checking O'Rahe's status window with the color of observation, he finally understood why she was so confident. Her physical stats and abilities were extraordinary. Sialjihu was drawn to her class ability, heart and soul, the most. It seemed like an ability that couldn't be acquired through contribution points. Maybe she is one of the true high rankers Master Zhang mentioned. Sialjihu realized just how great of a monster he worked with in Stage 1. It was then. Please stop. As O'Rahe was about to drop the man into the pit, a woman spoke up to stop her. She was a beautiful, blonde-haired woman wearing glasses that gave her a graceful, intelligent look. This was the first time Sialjihu saw her, but his surroundings quickly buzzed with whispers. From what he could pick up, the blonde-haired woman was Evangeline Rose, a grand pathfinder just like Kazuki. In other words, she was a high ranker. Who the hell are you? O'Rahe asked with a face that seemed to ask, what retard is it now? Despite Evangeline being a high ranker, it seemed she had no interest in her. Let him go. Evangeline Rose spoke simply as if to avoid unnecessary fighting. We will go in first. For a moment, Sial Jihu doubted his ears. What? It was the same with O'Rahi. She tightened her grip on the man, whom she was about to drop. Evangeline Rose continued, I'm not saying we will go in for free. The 12 of us will enter and scout the difficulty of the Plaza of Sacrifice. In exchange, we would like these two to enter the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. Of course, they won't be coming back to Stage 2. They'll be leaving through the red portal. Hearing her clear, silvery voice, Sial Jihu realized her move was more calculated than altruistic. Reading her comrades' status windows with the color of observation, Sial Jihu found out that most of them were level 4s, with the 2 who were left out being level 2s. It seemed they were part of the same organization, having brought the weaker members as a way of getting experience. But now that the situation was heading in a bad direction, they seemed to want to send the low-leveled ones home. And what if they get sent to Stage 3? Well, they'll have to escape on their own. There's nothing we can do about that. That doesn't sound like something a worried mother would say. We only know that 10 people can enter Stage 3. There's nothing that says it's first come, first serve. Either there is a condition we don't know about or it's random. Regardless, we can't do anything about luck. When O'Rahi asked in a provocative tone, Evangeline Rose struck back with calm. Besides, we're not saying we will use all of the 6 available slots. Since we're bearing the risk of being the first party to enter the Plaza of Sacrifice, wouldn't it be fair to give 4 of the 6 slots to us? She stealthily increased the slot they would take from 2 to 4. HNNG. O'Rahi hummed as though her interest had been piqued. She looked around the field, seemingly to check what the other spectators were thinking about. No one was voicing a word of complaint. Taking their silence as a sign of agreement, O'Rahi smirked before looking back at the trembling man. This is the correct way of being shameless. Watch and learn. She flung her arm, throwing the man away like a piece of trash. The man crashed on the ground and immediately crawled away from the pit in terror. She picked a good time. Sial Jihu admired inwardly as he looked at the hourglass, which only had 3 or 4 minutes remaining. Evangeline Rose had used the fact that they were running out of time to offer a deal. It was only possible because the group currently lacked information. By entering the Plaza of Sacrifice first, thereby stopping the hourglass and obtaining information, they had succeeded in sending some of their comrades into the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. Those left on the field would have to risk their chances of entering Stage 3, but they would gain information about the difficulty of the Plaza of Sacrifice without having to risk danger. In truth, Evangeline Rose's decision was a gamble and an adventure. Of course, she was a high ranker, and judging by the equipment her comrades were wearing, they seemed to have ample experience. The team balance wasn't bad either, but wouldn't it be too dangerous with just 12 people? Does anyone want to join us? You can also fit 2 people into the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. Evangeline Rose seemed to agree to Sial Jihu as she raised her voice and asked. Sial Jihu glanced at Kazuki. He was watching silently, seemingly with no desire to volunteer. Sial Jihu expected as much from Kazuki. He was the type of person who never stepped forward unless he was certain. After a moment of continued murmuring, 10 people volunteered additionally. The condition was the same. 8 of them would join the advance team while the other 2 would leave through the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. Evangeline Rose seemed to think this was enough people as she nodded her head. Filling all 6 spots for the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish would cause more headaches, and there wasn't enough time remaining anyways. Thus, the 20-person advance team disappeared into the left hole. When no one else entered for a few seconds, the Plaza of Sacrifice must have thought that was it. Kung! The entrance closed shut with a loud thud. Soon, the closed pit on the right opened up. The 4 people who were given the opportunity to leave hesitated for a moment, before noticing dozens of gazes on them and hurriedly disappearing into the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. There were spots left. 2 people could still enter the right pit. However, no one dared to move. The man who was threatened by O'Rahi was still shivering in fear, showing everyone what would happen if they acted on their own. Soon, the sand finished trickling down, and the hourglass flipped over. After quietly watching the first 10 minutes play out, Sial Jihu thought Evangeline Rose's method wasn't so bad. As no one in his temporary alliance was weak to the point of needing to be sent back, that only gave them a greater edge in picking out potential teams to cooperate with. The problem was finding a trustworthy team. However, this problem caused little to no trouble. The Triads, and there was another team, right? The other two organizations Kazuki allied with were coming in handy. But in any case, confirming the difficulty of the Plaza of Sacrifice was the top priority, since 6 was the minimum number of challengers. 20 should be more than enough, right? Although he thought this, it was nothing more than an assumption. Just because the monsters in Stage 1 were weak, it didn't mean that monsters in Stage 2 also had to be weak. The golden rule. Sial Jihu stared at the two pits emitting a reddish-golden light and quietly waited for the advance team to emerge. How much time went by? It felt like several tens of minutes had already passed. Just as the people standing around waiting were beginning to get bored, Kung! The sound of a door opening finally rang out, followed by a closing sound. The Plaza of the Dissonant Wish had been shut down the moment the Plaza of Sacrifice opened up. The crowd had been standing away from the pits to avoid being misunderstood. But when they sensed this change, they hurriedly gathered around the left pit. Sial Jihu followed Kazuki and slowly walked forward. Everyone waited for the advance team to come up. However, what? Why aren't they coming up? The door had opened, but the advance team didn't emerge no matter how long they waited. Maybe they're severely injured and can't jump up. Someone made a suggestion, while another cusped their hands over their mouth and yelled. However, only a vacant echo resounded, just as a shadow of apprehension and nervousness was cast over everyone's faces. Ah! Someone's index finger that was pointing at the pit quickly went up. Something had suddenly shot up from the pit. The thing that looked like a human body drew an arc in the air before crashing down on the field. That wasn't all. The pit continued to spit things out, almost as if it was coughing out food that was stuck in its throat. TK, roll. Something round with fluttering hair rolled on the ground and stopped in front of Sial Jihu's foot. When he subconsciously looked down, he couldn't help but gasp in shock. After all, sea corpses. What he saw was a severely damaged head. Evangeline Rose, just what had happened. Her long, silky hair was cut sparsely, and its previously dazzling blonde color was dyed crimson. Not only that, more than half of her tall nose was shaved off, and her intelligent, sagacious eyes gone as if they had been dug out. Looking at the tears of blood flowing down from her eye sockets, Sial Jihu groaned inwardly. Her neck was twisted and cut off like a churro. Judging by her distorted expression and crumpled mouth that revealed her uvula, he could tell how much she had struggled in pain before she died. SSSSSS. Then, when sand began to trickle down from the stopped hourglass, everyone became stunned. The advance team had returned as viciously damaged corpses. The hourglass's sand had begun to fall once again. It was very clear what these two phenomena were suggesting. Exit automatically opened once all enemies eliminated or no challengers remain. All 20 members of the advance team had died in the Plaza of Sacrifice, in other words, but they had a high ranker. The remaining 142 people had started off with the worst possible move. Chapter 123. Timing Game 3. Hick, hick. A sorrowful cry rang out. A white-haired girl wearing a white headband was sitting on the grassy field. She was Sial Jihu's comrade from Stage 1 and someone who had given him valuable advice to help him arrive at his answer. Wong. This girl was currently crying in a suppressed voice with her head buried between her knees. Sial Jihu's pity increased as her sorrowful weeps continued to ring out. He slowly reached out to console her, but paused before his hand touched her shoulder. After retrieving his hand, Sial Jihu bit down on his lower lip and looked around the field. He could see several people standing in their own groups, and as they all had their weapons out, a rather hostile, belligerent air flowed in the area. Moreover, how 110 people? That was the number of people currently left in Stage 2. There were 166 people when Stage 2 began, and the number had dwindled by 56 in just 2 days. They had either run away or were forced to sacrifice themselves. How did this happen? He furrowed his brows before slowly closing his eyes. Sial Jihu quietly began to recall the events that happened in the last 2 days. First day. The remaining participants of the banquet had sent an advance team into the Plaza of Sacrifice in exchange for allowing 4 of their comrades to exit. The result was a total failure. As all 20 members of the advance team perished, those waiting outside were not able to recover any information. That wasn't all. The advance team had consisted of Evangeline Rose, a high ranker, and a large number of level 4s. The fact that they were wiped out was not something that could be ignored. Almost 12% of the total force, including an elite among elites, had fallen without achieving anything. The situation quickly worsened after that. The pit continued to spit out one corpse after another, and sand continued to fall from the hourglass. It was a confusing situation, but there were people like Sial Jihu who tried to act calm. Kazuki quickly moved while carefully examining the corpses. He scrutinized several of them, and finally, after picking up the decapitated head of Evangeline Rose and inspecting it, he came to a conclusion. A devourer. He muttered quietly with a troubled voice. Damn it, the condition was a trap. He murmured like he was talking to himself, but as Sial Jihu was standing next to him, he could clearly hear him. A trap. Kazuki glanced to the side and nodded gently. Devourers are one of the most powerful undead monsters. They're especially frightening because of their strange sexual inclination towards the living. Sexual inclination toward the living? Sial Jihu didn't understand what this meant, but he didn't ask to find out. He felt like that was the better choice. Saying that only 6 people are needed when something like this comes out, I can only think of it as a trap. It would have been hard to defeat it even with 20 people. Just one wouldn't have been a problem. I don't know how many of them appeared, but they wouldn't have stood a chance if even 10 of them came out. Kazuki spoke firmly before making a worried expression. If only they had a high ranker specialized for battle. Evangeline Rose was a grand pathfinder. As she had specialized in scouting abilities, her battle prowess was lacking in comparison. In other words, this devourer had to be a monster that even Kazuki couldn't face easily. What's the chance it's a lick? At that moment, a familiar voice cut in. O'Rahi was looking at them from a little distance away. Kazuki shook his head. Liches also covet the living, but since the organs of the corpses are severely damaged, devourers should be the most likely enemy. HNNG. Well, I trust you. O'Rahi muttered quietly before turning her head at a sudden cheer. Sial Jihu also turned his gaze, only to furrow his brows in the next moment. A headless, naked body seemingly belonging to Evangeline Rose was rolling around the grass field. Next to it, Snake Eyes, or rather Audrey Bassler, was picking apart her equipment one by one and evaluating it. Wu Tilda. As expected of a high ranker, all of these are things I couldn't even dream of buying because of their price. Damn, her equipment really is as voluptuous as her body. HM. Audrey Bassler giggled in joy. O'Rahi clicked her tongue before staring at the hourglass with narrowed eyes. More than half of the sand had already fallen. There's no guarantee that devourers will appear again, right? No, but the difficulty should be similar. Will you be going in? We will have to, all of us. Good, get ready. O'Rahi moved as soon as she heard Kazuki's answer. Sial. Kazuki placed his hand on Sial's shoulder and whispered into his ear, Listen well. Soon, no matter how it happens, the people remaining on the field will enter the Plaza of Sacrifice. Yes. Don't go in first. Wait for a bit and enter around the middle. And from this moment on, whether you're inside that pit or outside, never stray far from your comrades. Got it? Kazuki's deathly serious expression made Sial Jihu nervous. Got it. Good. I'm going to look for Hugo and that person. You bring Maria and Chung Chohong here. Hearing Kazuki say that the team should first meet up, Sial Jihu nodded his head immediately. Soon, the Yumi Tsubaim and Carp Diem alliance met up. Now that things had turned out like this, everyone had no choice but to enter together. The ones who realized this entered the pit, even while feeling apprehensive, But the problem was with the ones who had no intention of entering Stage 3. They vehemently refused to go in. The sand in the hourglass kept trickling down, and there wasn't enough time to persuade them. In the end, the strong ones, who were in the majority, began to take a more forceful approach. Could threats be considered a method of persuasion? Without giving the others a chance to speak out, they began to intimidate others into going in. One man trudged into the pit, practically crying. With several archers threatening to kill him if he didn't enter, what other choice did he have? The ones who entered from verbal threats had it nice. There were some who refused and stood their ground even when they were threatened by people vastly stronger than them. These people were dragged away by force. One woman screamed and struggled desperately with all her strength, but O'Rahi pulled her by her hair and threw her into the plaza of sacrifice. And as more and more people were forcefully thrown into the plaza of sacrifice, the screams of protest began to die down. With 2 or 3 minutes remaining, the majority succeeded in suppressing the minority and finally began to enter the pit with breaths of relief. Meanwhile, Sialjihu quietly stood on the sidelines. He had no other choice. The weak, who had no interest in Stage 3 but were forcefully dragged into the left pit where they had a high chance of dying. The strong, who refused to take the risk and sacrifice themselves. He agreed with each side's logic. When the number of people remaining on the field diminished to only about a third, Sialjihu walked toward the pit with a bitter face. The inside of the plaza of sacrifice was chaos itself. Since people were thrown in with the plan, let's enter first and think afterwards, not a shred of orderliness could be found. From the inside, the plaza of sacrifice wasn't dark, but bright. Unlike how it seemed from the outside, it was spacious enough to hold 1,000 people. Around its circular wall were 10 doors evenly spaced apart. It felt like they had entered an ancient Roman Colosseum, not as spectators but as gladiators. At that moment, 7 doors simultaneously opened and a shrill cry rang out, "Hua!" The cry was chilling enough to cover one's back with goosebumps. Next, when Sialjihu caught sight of the group of monsters trudging out of the doors, he scowled. Over 20 monsters walked out of each door. Moreover, they were monsters he had faced once before. Short, yellow fur covered their bodies. Even the smallest one surpassed 2 meters in length, and their sharp claws caught his eye. That wasn't all. He saw 3 or 4 with especially agile or muscular bodies. Soon, lioners. The moment someone shouted out loud, the group of lioners fiercely charged forward simultaneously. The battle ended with the humans' victory. Although lioners weren't easy opponents, with every participant in the plaza of sacrifice, the human force was nothing to scoff at. There were several female lioners, which surpassed level 4 warriors in strength, and even a few lioner pack leaders, which were said to rival level 5 warriors in power. But as expected of the famous biannual banquet, there were many level 4s on the human side, as well as a handful of high rankers. Although they suffered 12 casualties, the deaths had all occurred in the beginning when they were attacked before they could form a plan. Soon, when they came up with a formation and entered battle, the general consensus among the strong was that the battle was better than they expected. And once the battle ended, those who barely managed to escape with their lives checked the hourglass first. The timing device had stopped. They waited for a few moments with great anxiety in their hearts, but the hourglass showed no sign of flipping over. Only then did they breathe a sigh of relief. Conquering the plaza of sacrifice seemed to be the condition required to stop the hourglass. Of course, they couldn't set aside the possibility of the hourglass moving again. Sincerely hoping that this wouldn't be the case, the worried participants began to search for members of their teams. That was where the problem occurred. 142 people had entered the plaza of sacrifice. Since 12 of them had died, there should be 130 people remaining. But when they went and opened up the lid, only 128 people remained. This meant 2 people had used the commotion to sneak into the plaza of the dissonant wish. Those sons of bitches. The remaining people grit their teeth in fury, but it was impossible to capture those who had escaped. Next, representatives of those who chose to focus on Stage 2 came together to hold a conference. Now that the hourglass had stopped, they felt the need to establish a rule. The conference went at a snail's pace. Considering the sheer number of participants, it was obvious that there would be many differing opinions. But the biggest conflict was between everyone should continue to go in and we refuse to go in. You want us to go in there again? Isn't that too harsh? A male representative from the latter faction vented his anger. You are trying to be obstinate after experiencing what's down there. It's obvious what we should do. And a female representative from the former faction struck back coldly. In truth, judging only by the result, it was more effective for everyone to go in. I'm saying this precisely because I experienced it. However, the man also had things to say. People with huge backings like you all aren't the only people coming to this banquet. You might be working in carefully formed teams, but we are working as individuals. The average level of your side is between level 4 and 5, but it's between level 2 and 3 for us. So what is it that you're trying to say? Speaking bluntly, didn't you play by yourselves in the previous battle? This time the woman became speechless. You forced us into the pit so we could fight together, but when the battle started, you acted as if we didn't exist. If we enter again, we will be the first ones to die. Would you enter if you were in our shoes? Ego tilde cry me a bucket, will ya? It's your fault for entering the banquet with your measly skills. We know how weak we are, that's why we're saying we'll quit and leave. The woman's snarky remark was met with an angry rebuttal. Then what are you saying we should do? The woman also raised her voice. Phew, fine. Let's do this. The fuming man took a deep breath and spoke. You don't want us to enter the plaza of the dissonant wish because it might ruin your chance of entering stage 3, correct? Then it's simple. We will not enter the plaza of sacrifice. In return, we will enter the plaza of the dissonant wish last. What? I'm saying we'll go in after you all. Doesn't that solve the problem? Ha! The woman laughed as if she found the statement hilarious. Are you trying to pretend the dissonant wish doesn't exist? You're telling us to sacrifice ourselves. In my eyes, this is much more humane than what you suggested, which is to use us as meat shields. Humane? You're trying to discuss humanity in paradise. Besides, who's going to ensure that you won't run off to the plaza of the dissonant wish while we are toiling away to beat the plaza of sacrifice? The man thought for a moment before opening his mouth. If you're that worried, just have someone monitor us. Hilarious. To monitor dozens of people on your side, we'll need 10 to 20 people from our side. You really expect us to do that when even one person is vital to our survival? You don't like this, you don't like that. What the hell do you want us to do? I'm telling you to pay if you want to eat. In truth, the man's offer was a good compromise if it was changed just slightly. No, it could have been a good compromise. If the strong faction had a few more people, then they might have seriously considered it. But with one high ranker and 19 level 4s perishing in vain, there really was no room left for compromise. Just missing the ones who didn't want to enter would create a huge gap in their overall prowess. And to top it off, if even the strong were left out, the burden on the remaining fighters would become too big. Thus, following the man's suggestion was out of the question. Sial Jihu pressed his temples. Watching the conference unfold, he felt like he was staring into a horizon stretching endlessly into the distance. With the situation being what it is, one might expect some compromise from both sides, but that wasn't happening because both sides were yelling at the top of their lungs to not lose a single inch. You really think we're asking for your opinion because we can't force you? Well, fine, try it. Even a worm squirms when you step on it. You think we'll just sit still? As the atmosphere began to take a violent turn. Now, calm down, everyone. A man with an aquiline nose and slicked-back hair cut in. It's nice to voice each side's opinions, but let's not be so hostile. What if a catastrophe similar to the one from the 4th banquet breaks out? Hearing this, the bickering man and woman turned their gazes with dumbfounded expressions. This was because this slick-haired man was the same man who was the most passionate in suppressing the minority before the first battle. The sun's setting soon. Why don't we call it a night? Speaking of which, the sun seemed to rise and set in this place as well. The grassy plain was currently dyed orange by the evening glow. I think everyone is too worked up. Let's cool our heads a bit. What if the hourglass flips while we're lounging around? There are more than just one or two people keeping an eye out on that thing. If that happens, we'll just meet back up quickly. Besides, we need to rest too. Otherwise, we won't have the energy to fight. He certainly wasn't wrong. Those who cleared stage 1 towards the end had not rested a single moment. Everyone likely needed some time to recharge. Thus, to calm down and to eat, the conference was adjourned, and the different groups formed their little campsites around the field. That was a mistake. The incident broke out towards the end of the evening when the tension had loosened slightly. Chapter 124. Seol Jihu. By the time people found out about the incident, the Plaza of Sacrifice had already spat out 6 corpses. The perpetrator and mastermind had to be the slick-haired man, as he and 5 others were nowhere to be seen. It was later found out that he had approached low-level participants offering to join hands. Clearly, he had subdued them and forced them into the pit before running away by using the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. The number of remaining participants diminished from 128 to 116. However, the problem wasn't with the number of people left. The aforementioned incident, in which the strong had sacrificed the weak, had enough influence on the participants to temporarily stop all talks of beating the stages system. After all, it was proven that another method existed to escape Stage 2. The minority didn't stay still either. They gathered together and remained on high alert, clearly refusing to become scapegoats. When Seol Jihu saw the minority representative from the first conference walking around and uniting people, he felt relieved inwardly. Like the saying, "United we stand, divided we fall," if the weak gathered their forces, the strong shouldn't be able to touch them so easily. However, that way of thinking was too naive. Members of the majority faction and the minority faction were all human beings. No matter how careful they were, an opportunity could be made artificially. Furthermore, not all strong were evil and not all weak were kind. It wasn't until late that night that Seol Jihu came to realize this truth. People made their camps as far away from the pit as possible. This was because the 2 plazas were only 10 meters away from each other. If someone managed to throw 6 people into the Plaza of Sacrifice, escaping through the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish was practically guaranteed. And there wasn't a single person present who didn't realize this. Seol Jihu got to witness the second attempt by pure coincidence. After remembering the white headband girl, who gave him valuable advice during Stage 1, he went out to look for her in hopes that she could do the same. Since he couldn't see her among the majority, he walked towards the minority. It was then. He suddenly felt a strange current in the air. To be precise, he smelled a sticky, unpleasant odor that seemed to drain the energy from his body. Soon, he heard muffled groans coming out from the campsite of the minority faction. He had a hunch that an incident similar to that of the evening was unfolding. Noticing that the surroundings were eerily quiet, Seol Jihu chose to run towards the pit rather than look around the campsite. Wishing in his heart that he wasn't late, he ran at full speed. Things were exactly as he expected. Seol Jihu caught sight of 6 shadowy figures in the distance. 1 or 2 people standing in the front seemed to be throwing something into the pit. Then, when he spotted a white headband amidst the darkness, he followed his instincts, activating the festina earring and throwing a mana spear. "Ooh up! Hurry! Fuck! Are you sure she inhaled the incense?" "Ooh up! I am." She was next to the injured one. A man was busy trying to block the girl's mouth, seemingly worried that noise would leak out and expose them, but in the next moment he scowled harshly. "Aye, Puck." The man punched the girl's stomach with his giant fist and turned around when he sensed a murderous intent. Seeing a spear of mana flying toward him, he reflexively moved his head. A sharp sensation brushed past his nose, and the terrifying gale that followed made his expression distort. "Fuck. Hurry and throw her in." Seeing a shadow charging towards him at lightning speed, the man passed the girl over to his comrade and took a battle stance. Seeing a blue spear thrusting straight at him, he swung his blunt weapon in full force. Clang. Along with the ringing of metallic sound, the man's eyes widened. He was confident in his abilities and had fully intended to send the spear flying, but instead ended up almost letting go of his weapon. When his eyes met the attacker's sharp, gleaming eyes, his body froze automatically. He took a small breath to drive the fear away and clenched his teeth. But the figure refused to move, even after he put enough strength to bulge up the veins on his muscles. How can such a skinny guy? Uwuwak? He's not a low-level earthling. Sial Jihu also grasped the situation. Judging by the pressure he was feeling in his hands and the equipment the man was wearing, he guessed that the man was at least a level 4. The minority faction should have been on guard, so he couldn't help but wonder how the man sneaked into their camp. However, he didn't have time to be worrying about that at the moment. Help! Fucking bitch, just go in there already. Ack, the man requesting for help and the girl's desperate, screaming voice mixed together to torment Sial Jihu's ears. Without hesitation, Sial Jihu utilized his full strength. Yuwu! After hastily rousing his mana and striking the man's blunt weapon up, he swung his spear in an almost twisting maneuver and smashed the man's head. As the man collapsed helplessly, he could see a girl chest-deep in the pit, hanging by the skin of her teeth using both of her arms. Next to her, he spotted another man furiously stomping on the girl's hands. Pang! Completely enraged, Sial Jihu activated the Festina earring again. At the same time, the grass the girl was clutching onto was pulled out. Yes, thwack! He kicked the rejoicing man away, and immediately Sial Jihu's jaw dropped open. He saw the man's face. He was wondering who was committing such heinous acts in the wake of night, and he turned out to the representative of the minority faction, who made an impassioned speech during the conference. He couldn't believe that the perpetrator was within the minority faction, and their leader to boot. However, that moment of disbelief only lasted a second. Sial Jihu quickly bent down and reached his hand into the pit. He couldn't tell whether he grabbed onto the girl's hair or some other part, but thankfully, he was able to grab onto something meaty. Worried that the door would close, he quickly pulled her up. Ki-you! Suddenly, a massive, muscular arm shot up. The moment it grabbed onto the earth, a giant climbed up from the pit in a swimming fashion. He was carrying the white headband girl on his shoulder. In a fluster, Sial Jihu remembered that the giant was the man who last reached the mountaintop in Stage 1. It seemed he had been thrown into the pit unconscious, but had woken up and climbed out. He glanced at Sial Jihu before spitting out a rough breath. Those damned sons of bitches. A hate-filled voice similar to a ghost's cry flowed out. They dare to use a sleeping incense? His eyes were bloodshot, either from the drugs or from his rage. Regardless, he was viciously glaring at the collapsed man as if he was ready to tear him to shreds. Then he staggered a bit before carefully placing the girl down. Qa! He bellowed like a wounded beast. His roar resonated throughout the entire field. That wasn't the end of the trouble. For the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish to open, 6 people needed to enter the Plaza of Sacrifice. Since the pit came to lack 2 people, there was no way the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish would open. Soon, people who noticed the uproar came out like a swarm of bees. The perpetrators behind the attack were left with nowhere to run. Everyone who fell into the pit was rescued. The 6 perpetrators were then killed by the enraged crowd. With no way to stop the killing, the number of participants fell to 110. This second failed attempt ended up pouring oil onto a burning house. It was shocking enough that only a few hours had passed since the first successful attempt. But the fact that the perpetrator was the representative of the minority faction came as an even bigger shock. Who would have imagined that the man who fought against the strong for the benefit of the weak would give in to such temptation now? An almost irreparable crack formed among the minority. Sial Jihu opened his closed eyes. It's my fault. The girl raised her head slightly and muttered in a quiet voice. In Sial Jihu's eyes, the girl was just a human being. Seeing her eyes moist with tears and her reddened cheeks, he felt sorry about relying on her one-sidedly. Appa got hurt trying to save me. The giant and the girl were brother and sister. Although they looked nothing alike, Sial Jihu wasn't so insensitive as to bring that up. The man was already in a sorry state after Stage 1, but apparently He had fought while protecting his younger sister during the battle against the Lioners, and ended up worsening his injuries. To recover, he had fallen asleep after taking a healing potion, and the perpetrators had apparently used this opportunity to spread the sleeping incense and bring them to the plaza of sacrifice. If it weren't for me. The girl sniveled, unable to continue talking. Sial Jihu placed his hand on the girl's frail shoulder. No. In that instant, the girl flinched for some reason. Her head began to tremble. It's not your fault, nor is it your brother's. When he continued calmly, her shaking began to subside. It was just that those 6 were despicable criminals. The girl sniffled and asked as she looked up at him, "Appa will be okay, right?" "Of course." Sial Jihu got on his knee and smiled gently. "I requested a high-ranker priest to treat him, so he will recover in no time." Seemingly consoled by the youth's kind words, she burst into tears and threw herself into his embrace. Sial Jihu gently patted the girl's back and let out a small sigh. Just what was the banquet? He couldn't understand why it was given a welcoming name like banquet in the first place. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to call it a living hell? Sial Jihu activated his 9 eyes while consoling the sobbing girl. The 2 pits in the distance were still glistening in a golden light. Why? He could understand why the plaza of the dissonant wish would be gold. However, he just couldn't wrap his head around the plaza of sacrifice being gold. Why wasn't such a dirty, dangerous place shining in the color of danger? Did the 9 eyes not judge it to be dangerous? Or was there something encompassing this stage too that went beyond any level of danger? He couldn't rule out the former, but he was strongly leaning toward the latter. He had a feeling that perhaps his 9 eyes were overlooking the entire banquet from the very beginning. Sial Jihu stared at the plaza of sacrifice vacantly. Right. There had to be a reason. A reason it was appearing as the Golden Commandment. The hourglass stopped after the first successful battle and did not move again. The remaining participants were happy at first, thinking they escaped being forced to make their move. But looking back, the stopping of the hourglass provided more leisure, and that leisure mutated into betrayal and tyranny, creating widespread distrust. This was easy to see by looking at the minority faction. There was no group more disingenuous and double-faceted than this one. Its members stayed together due to necessity, but what they were thinking on the inside had to differ from how they were acting on the outside. Time was flowing by meaninglessly. Cooperation was necessary to conquer the stage, but the notion was completely out of the picture with how much the atmosphere had deteriorated. What was important to the people wasn't conquering the stage, but survival. Sial Jihu smoked one cigarette after the other. He tasted nothing but bitterness in his mouth. Although it was a little, he even felt a sense of shame. I couldn't do anything again. When he first entered stage 2, he was full of spirit. He vowed to do something to show a better side of him, even if only a little. But now that he faced reality, he was repeating the same thing he did in stage 1. Of course, Sial Jihu knew he wasn't anywhere near enough to take on the role of a leader in this place. Unlike stage 1, stage 2 was targeted for all participants. Naturally, there were many who vastly surpassed him in strength, intelligence, and leadership. Even some high rankers couldn't speak out casually, having to look for the right timing. As a mere level 3 warrior, Sial Jihu had no choice but to stay put. But was being a spectator on the sidelines the right choice? He didn't do anything that would make him feel guilty, but he was afraid of how this result would return to him. After all, this was the Golden Commandment. And in stage 1, he had personally watched and experienced how the Golden Rule functioned. This fear made his heart beat faster. All of his senses were telling him that he couldn't let things be like flowing water, and that he needed to change its course no matter what. This wasn't such a baseless hunch. Only 110 people remained. It was lacking in a sense, but he felt that this was the line of no return. Assuming that everyone joined hands, he could see a way out just barely. But if the number of participants decreased even a little, then conquering the plaza of sacrifice would become impossible. Since the number of remaining people was decreasing by the day, he no longer had any time to waste. He couldn't think of any bright idea, but it wasn't as if he was completely in the dark. A way out had to exist. In truth, This was something that everyone present knew, not just Seol Jihu. It was just that no one was stepping up. Knowing that reaching this way out would be extremely difficult and full of obstacles, they had simply given up. Seol Jihu had been the same. The situation had already been twisted so much, and with the interpersonal chasm becoming wider by the hour, just thinking about where to begin gave him a headache. "Ha!" he sighed yet again. No matter how many times he thought about the matter, doing it alone seemed impossible. Thankfully, Seol Jihu wasn't alone. He had comrades he trusted. What's wrong about using something you've built up fair and square? He was suddenly reminded of Kazuki's words, "I can do it." "No, I have to do it." Seol Jihu took a deep breath and walked forward. "HM." Kazuki looked surprised by the sudden visitor. "Mr. Kazuki? What is your plan from now on?" "I don't know." Kazuki readily raised the white flag, hearing the abrupt question. Several incidents broke out before anything could be done. This stage is likely the hardest the banquet's second stage has ever been. I can't even begin to think about how to go about it. Kazuki looked a little embarrassed. Of course, it wasn't his fault that things had turned out like this, but he couldn't help but feel frustrated inside. "I do think we need to hold another conference. Will we come to a decision?" "No." Kazuki shook his head and smacked his lips before abruptly widening his eyes. He sensed something out of place from the young man in front of him. Seol Jihu's expression was strangely sunken in. He didn't have his usual bright, playful face. His expression was hard to read. The way he looked almost entranced, Kazuki felt he was looking at a different person. Could it be Kazuki's eyes flickered with light? "You have a good idea?" he asked, feeling hopeful. However, "The good ideas all went out the window," Seol Jihu replied coldly. "I guess you're right." Kazuki folded his arms and rubbed his chin. The way and method of doing something naturally changed depending on the situation. What Seol Jihu was saying was that they had already lost the opportune moment to make the ideal move, a method that fits this situation. "There is only one." Kazuki stared at the youth fixedly, and Seol Jihu started talking. Once the youth finished his explanation, Kazuki fell into deep thought. "Now that's surprising. I didn't think you would choose such a straightforward approach. It's not like I can always think of good, unique ideas." "No, that's not what I meant." Kazuki shook his hand. "I agree with you. That is the only way. I think everyone knows that." "Right. But they're keeping it in their heads," Kazuki spoke calmly. "The majority faction isn't sitting still because they don't know what needs to be done." He hesitated for a moment before speaking with difficulty. "It's the same for me. Even if everyone cooperates, level 4s and level 5s will need to stand in the front lines of the battle. If we do as you say, each side will have to give up one thing that can't be yielded. The majority side will not accept an equal trade. They will voice their opposition without a doubt." "I don't think that's necessarily the case." Seol Jihu spoke. "In Stage 2, the relationship between the majority and the minority shouldn't be parasitic." "I know, but there is a definitive difference between those with a choice and those without." Kazuki spoke bluntly. However, Seol Jihu couldn't deny that it was true. The minority faction is at a dead end. Even if they disagree with your plan, they have no choice but to agree, but that's not the case for us. The light in Seol Jihu's eyes grew fiercer. "I have a plan." "What is it?" Kazuki, who had maintained his calm the entire time, furrowed his brows. Seol Jihu opened his mouth. "I have a way of changing the apparent parasitism to symbiosis." Kazuki was about to say something when he hurriedly closed his mouth. It was a known fact that having more people made conquering the Plaza of Sacrifice easier. However, the majority faction knew that there was no need to take the difficult way. When they knew, it was easier to simply devour the minority forces. Seol Jihu saying this had to mean that he had a method of overturning this status quo. What could it be? If such a thing really existed, it could turn the tables in one fell swoop. Then why didn't you? Kazuki was about to say something when he saw Seol Jihu hesitating and realized why he had not said anything until now. "I can't be sure," Seol Jihu muttered, "but it's worth confirming. 3 or 4 times no, once or twice is enough." Seol Jihu emphasized his last point one more time. "Once or twice is enough. Please help me." His voice carried a sense of sincerity and conviction. Kazuki raised his hands and rubbed his face. After thinking for quite some time, he opened his mouth with an exhausted voice. "We'll have to persuade the minority first, Mr. Kazuki." Sial Jihu's complexion brightened. "I'll have to rethink my decision to cooperate with Carp Diem next time. Every time I'm with you, it feels like I'm walking on a tightrope." Kazuki smirked. "Next, Sial." He suddenly turned serious. "I hate to say it again, but there will be opposition. You asked me because you expected as much, right?" "Yes." "Then promise me one thing." With an intense stare, he put more strength into his voice. "If you're going to do it properly." Strength entered Sial Jihu's eyes. "Now it's do or die. It's unacceptable to half-ass things like in stage 1. "I know." Kazuki looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected the youth to answer immediately. "I think I kind of get it." Sial Jihu smiled faintly. "What you told me about finding clothes that fit me." "Oh, yeah." He tilted his chin up slightly and examined the youth. He didn't seem to be lying. "Then try it." The corners of his mouth curled up. "I'll set the stage for you." Chapter 125, Sial Jihu 2. The minority faction was about 30% of the remaining participants, and they consisted of two types: those who entered the banquet alone, and those who entered as a team and were now left alone. Although they were treated like weaklings in the banquet, looking from an objective standpoint, they weren't so weak as to be treated like dregs. Just the fact they managed to enter was proof of their abilities. After all, they would have had to fend off dozens and dozens of competitors. In reality, it wouldn't have been strange for some of the strong teams to try to recruit some of them for the stage. But the problem was that the first recruitment targets became sacrificial lambs. And when the same incident occurred a few hours later, the Rubicon had been crossed. Rather than going into a strong team and fearing for their lives, they chose to remain with people in the same situation. Of course, the problem was that nowhere was safe. After arriving at the minority faction's camping ground, Sial Jihu felt several stinging gazes sticking on him like bullets. They were so full of hostility and wariness that simply describing them as unwelcoming wasn't enough. It would be easier if I could talk to someone I knew. Sial Jihu slowly looked around the camp before spotting the white headband girl and her older brother in the distance. The giant still looked intimidating, but it seemed his injuries had been healed as his complexion looked better. When the girl waved her hand, Sial Jihu greeted them back. Meanwhile, the giant was staring at him without a single reaction. He must remember being helped, as he revealed no sign of hostility. However, his gaze wasn't so friendly either. "Ah." At that moment, someone muttered as if they knew Sial Jihu. Sial Jihu turned to the direction of the sound and instantly spotted a girl with a bob cut. It was Lara Wolf, the female archer he met during stage 1. "You're—" "Hello." Sial Jihu bent his waist and greeted her. "I didn't know you were here." "Oh, I couldn't find my comrades when I entered stage 2, Lara spoke as she scratched her short hair. Then when she saw Sial Jihu going she quickly put on a smile. "It's fine. They might have been eliminated instead. Anyways, why are you here?" Thanking her for changing the subject, Sial Jihu got down to business. "There's something I need to say." Then I'll come with you." Lara tried to walk closer. After thinking for a moment, Sial Jihu shook his head. After the traitors died, the minority faction lacked someone to call a representative. Lara clearly couldn't be the spokesperson for the group. "No." I'll say it here." Lara paused, and her facial muscles froze stiff. Declaring that he would speak here when everyone was watching meant that he had come to see everyone, not just her. "Okay, go ahead." It wasn't as if she had any authority to decide the matter, but she gave her consent anyways. Although the situation had turned out like this, she still remembered the act of kindness he showed during stage 1. To be completely honest, a part of her was hoping he would come save her like he did in stage 1. It might appear as if she was being shameless, but she wasn't the only one hoping. People from the minority side weren't antagonistic towards Sial Jihu. It was partly because he had saved the brother and sister not too long ago, but at the same time, it was also because they were hoping for someone to come save them. Feeling the atmosphere, Sial Jihu felt his heart sink in. He never thought having expectations on his shoulders would be so heavy and compelling. How should he put it? Sial Jihu hesitated for a long time before realizing that it was meaningless. They should know the situation they were in better than anyone else. As such, I won't beat around the bush. He cut to the chase. I need everyone's cooperation. I know it will be tough, but I'd like you to participate in conquering the Plaza of Sacrifice. As soon as he raised the main point, sighs rang out from his surroundings. I know. Lara Wolf smiled bitterly. Neither she nor anybody else here were fools. They knew that was the only way. I know, but... Lara Wolf raised both hands, twiddling her fingers as if she had something to say. However, seeming unable to find the right words, she put them back down. You know. Kazuki had called them the people without a choice. Just like his words suggested, their fate was to enter the Plaza of Sacrifice and become meat shields, or to become sacrificial lambs without anyone's knowledge. No matter which path they chose, death was the only thing waiting for them. They were truly driven to a corner with nowhere to go. At first, they were forced by people. Now they were forced by the circumstance. I will become your shield. Lara tilted her head. He wasn't asking them to become shields, but saying he would become one himself. Next, Sial Jihu explained his thoughts loud and clear for everyone to hear. I understand what you're saying, but even after the explanation ended, Lara didn't seem all that moved. I mean, you're right, but... She kept blurring the end of her speech. Almost as if she didn't want to anger the youth, she picked out each word with utmost care. Sial Jihu patiently waited for her. Can we trust you? In the end, they came back to the problem of principle. It was something they had to address. However, trust wasn't something that could be seen, and the chasm of mistrust had become too deep for words to do any good. But it was human nature to want to listen, even if the words were empty. Lara Wolf must have asked for precisely this reason. Sial Jihu calmly replied, I won't ask you to trust me right here and now. Huh, Lara blinked her widened eyes. Since she asked a question of principle, she expected to receive an answer of principle. Or, at worst, she expected persuasion adorned with grandiosity. I'd like you to give me a chance. However, the youth's words were so clean and direct. They seemed like a meat dish that had all of its oil extracted out. Moreover, the man in front of her belonged to a powerful team that vied for the top position, even among the teams of the strong faction. His desperate, grave face strangely pulled on her heartstrings. It was to the point that, I will bet my name on it. She wanted to take a chance. I would like you to give me a chance to make you trust me, and trust him just once. A conference was held. It wasn't just a gathering of the representatives, rather of all the remaining 110 people. Another noteworthy thing was that the members of the minority faction sat with Carp Diem and Yumi Tsubame's alliance team. It was a rather strange sight for the majority faction, who had stayed silent and non-aggressive. The first one to speak up was the man who called for the conference, Kazuki. However, he didn't say anything special. He only recounted the situation they were in and described a general direction they needed to go in. Simply put, he was setting the stage for Sial Jihu to speak. So, Rahi, who was listening with an indifferent face, finally opened her mouth. I think it's about time you make your point. Kazuki must have thought this was enough as he slowly wrapped up his point. As he finished, Sial Jihu exchanged glances with each of his comrades. Chohong nodded her head slightly, and Hugo gave a thumbs-up in silence. Maria looked unmoved, while the robed priest seemed to be looking at him worriedly. He felt reassured. Soon, he got up from his seat after exchanging glances with Kazuki. Curious gazes naturally fell on the two men. It's different. Faced with dozens of gazes, Sial Jihu felt a different kind of pressure than before. He could see several high rankers, including Rahi, as well as Snake Eyes or Audrey Bassler. Each of them sat with confidence and leisure. However, this attitude got on his nerves. Meanwhile, Rahi twiddled the ends of her hair and smiled. Who's he? Can the local news commentator fuck off? Rahi spat back at someone's question. The man who spoke up made a sour expression. Who the hell? No, ma'am. It's just that we need to know who he is. HNNG. Rahi nodded her head and snickered. You said you were Haramark Sial? Murmur, murmur. A small commotion broke out. Sial Jihu could hear various versions of he's him or carp diem. Seeing people's interest in him grow, Sial Jihu opened his mouth and cut to the chase. A little while ago, the 32 people from the minority side, who previously refused to participate in the conquering of the Plaza of Sacrifice, expressed their intention to participate. The commotion died down. Sial Jihu wasn't as nervous as he thought. He only thought he was doing what he needed to. As such, I suggest we organize several teams out of the 110 people. The 70 or so people from the majority side exchanged glances. The minority faction participating was something they had been asking for, but even if the other side made a concession, asking to reorganize new teams was a bit. Since there are 7 doors inside the Plaza of Sacrifice, we will divide everyone into 7 teams. Sial Jihu suggested to form teams of 15-16 people to handle each of the 7 doors. The problem was with his statement of reforming teams. He said that the members of the teams should be able to move if the situation called for it. And more importantly, the 32 minority members had to be distributed evenly. In other words, he was telling the majority side to make a concession. Those from the majority might not approve it in their heads, but they knew it wasn't a wrong thing to ask logically speaking. However, knowing something in their heads and accepting it within their hearts were completely different. Wow, someone voiced their complaint out loud. Well, aren't you spoiled? The owner of the voice was none other than Audrey Bassler. Why don't you be quiet? As she was about to butt in, somebody else cut in. Bassler turned around with a face that seemed to say, "Who dares?" Then she saw a burly man glaring at her. "Who the hell are?" Bassler spoke provocatively, but when she saw 6 men standing tall behind the burly man with their hands behind their backs, she whistled. "Ooh, Tilda acting all scary Tilda, so it's the Triad's young Lord Tilda. All right, I get it. Stop glaring at me like that, MK. I said shut up." Hao Win continued with a condescending look. "Can't you see he's still talking? Geez." Bassler shrugged her shoulders and smacked her lips. How can people without a backing survive in this cruel world? After succeeding in making Snake Eyes shut up, Hao Win turned back to the front. Sial Jihu and O'Rahi were in the middle of a conversation. No. Every time we beat the Plaza of Sacrifice, we need to send 6 people into the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. This is a must. Why? As you know, the number of remaining participants will decrease as the fight continues. That's true. O'Rahi agreed for now. She knew it was unrealistic to hope no one would die during the 19 battles, although the participants had easily conquered the Plaza of Sacrifice when they had 140 people. Expecting the same with 110 people was being too greedy. As the difficulty of the plaza was static, it was obvious that having less people would make beating it more difficult. So we'll need to find a method of reinforcing our fighting power. And that's going into the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish, going in and coming back out, to be precise. Sial Jihu corrected her. It's only an assumption, but isn't everybody here hoping to leave Stage 2? Light flickered in O'Rahi's eyes. She finally understood what the youth was getting at. Indeed, the reward of Stage 2 was granting the participants' wishes, even if they were in a twisted form. It was the reward Earthlings looked forward to the most. The banquet being a huge biannual event was one reason, but the reward was what enticed them the most. After all, they would be able to receive a jaw-dropping reward just by clearing Stage 2. Connecting these 2 points together, Sial Jihu's plan made sense. Whether it be a high-quality weapon, armor, potion, or scroll, if even a small number of the 110 participants could obtain the above, their overall strength would undoubtedly go up. Perhaps they would get lucky and see an explosive rise as well. What you say makes sense. O'Rahi tapped on her knee with her index finger. But you know what that entails, right? Yes. Good. Then tell me how you're going to select the 6 people, and how you're going to ensure they come back without leaving through the portal. The 6 people will be chosen by the representatives of the 7 teams. By team? No, only 6 people can go in. Since there are 7 teams, picking one from each team should be impossible. We won't be doing that. Sial Jihu shook his head. We'll follow a strict rule to select them. Rule? It's simple. Sial Jihu continued. We will pick 4 from the 78 and 2 from the 32. There were 78 in the majority side and 32 in the minority side. Except, the 6 chosen must not be related in any way. Being a quick thinker, O'Rahi understood what he meant and went, picking 4 people with equal strength to keep each other in check. Even if they had a different idea, they would have to come back to stage 2 where the rest of their comrades were. Otherwise, they would be guilty by association. Of course, it would be difficult to apply guilty by association to members of the minority side. However, they wouldn't be able to move so easily with 4 from the majority side watching like hawks. O'Rahi dropped her head and fell in thought. The 2 of them ended up talking about the plan, but everyone else surely must have heard them. Sial Jihu turned his eyes off O'Rahi and looked around his surroundings. No one had spoken out in opposition. Knowing that the plan was a good compromise, everyone was thinking about it carefully. It would be great if everything worked out, but Sial Jihu didn't expect things to be that easy. After all, Kazuki guaranteed that someone would raise an opposition. No, listen. After all, it was difficult for there to be no crazies among the 78. I can't bear to listen to this farce any longer. It was Audrey Bassler. As if she found this whole thing unbearably enjoyable, her venomous, serpentine eyes were curled viciously. What a joke. When Sial Jihu stared at her, she pouted her lower lip and murmured, "To be honest, I can't understand those guys participating at this moment." "What can't you understand?" "I mean, Tilda, isn't it obvious?" Bassler snickered. "They didn't do a thing when we were telling them do this or do that. Now that the situation turns to this, they're clinging onto the prince. Fucking leeches, aren't they?" She relentlessly spat out venomous words. "It's the same with forming teams. Let's be frank here. Cooperation? You're just telling us to protect those weaklings, aren't you?" Bassler asked for an agreement, but when Sial Jihu opened his mouth, she shook her hand and continued talking. Of course, I know what you mean. You're telling us not to push them too far because they're pitiful. Now that things turned out this way, you want us to hold hands and work together, right?" Sial Jihu laughed, wondering how she could possibly have interpreted his words that way. "I'll be honest. If we were to do as you say, each team will have to take on 5 or 6 people. Sorry, but unlike you, it's not my hobby to do volunteer work." Sial Jihu calmly asked, "What are you trying to say?" "Aha, I knew you were astute." Audrey Bassler snickered even more. "Well, I'm not as good with words, so I'll just say it outright." She spoke shamelessly while glancing to the side. "There's nothing we can do about stage 3. But have those guys give up all 32 dissonant wishes. It was an absurd request. As for how to distribute them amongst us, we can work that out later. If they agree, I think we're getting somewhere." "No," Sial Jihu immediately refused. "It's not like they're doing nothing. We can't do that when they are actively participating in conquering this stage." Snake Eyes closed her mouth and blinked her eyes. Her nasty expression really made him want to beat her to death. "That's what you think, fucking retard." She smirked, and with a long sigh she slicked her bangs up. Chapter 126. Sial Jihu 3. Silence filled the air. The spectators watched on with varied expressions, Sial Jihu's comrades with stiff faces, the 32 minority members with nervousness, and the 78 majority members with curiosity. The majority's silence could be seen as a tacit agreement of Audrey Bassler's words. Although they weren't agreeing with her openly, what she said must have caught their interest. That was simply how the human psyche worked. The moment they were directly involved in a problem, the fairness of the situation no longer mattered. Only gains and losses were important. "Don't think too badly of me." Audrey Bassler knew this too well. "Ask them if you want." Of course they might feel disgusted since they have to give up their rewards, but deep inside, I'm sure they're happy to have a chance of survival. She said whatever she wanted. "Anyways, talk among yourselves and come to a decision," and came up with the terms of agreement herself. Sial Jihu stared at her intently. Snake Eyes smiled ferociously and asked, "What's up with those eyes? Why are you glaring at me like that?" The 78 people from the majority side and the 32 people from the minority side need a symbiotic relationship. Sial Jihu finally opened his mouth. "With one side missing, the other side cannot conquer the stage." Tilda, Basler dragged out the end of her sentence and smiled with her eyes. An ominous feeling welled up inside Sial Jihu, and his mood quickly sunk. He wasn't sure if Basler was doing this on purpose or if this was just her personality. Regardless, she really seemed to be a born provocateur. Really? Sial Jihu was about to ask, what do you mean? However, his complexion quickly stiffened. He realized the cause of his previous ominous feeling. What came next wasn't something that should be said in this place. However, Audrey Basler's mouth didn't stop. You might find out tomorrow morning. In the end, she said it, cackling to herself while staring at the 32 minorities. She shouldn't have said that. If she knew how the 32 people, the victims of the previous incident included, felt. If she knew why this conference was called for, she shouldn't have said that even as a joke. After all, that was equivalent to kicking away the chance they barely managed to clutch onto. Sial Jihu slowly tilted his head up and stared at the sky. Kekekek. Huh, you're mad. Did she really think that? Or was she doing this on purpose, fully knowing the consequences behind her words? Where's all the killing and backstabbing and, the fun stuff? It's gotta be more hardcore than this. Perhaps it was both. Considering the status window he saw in Stage 1, she was more than capable of doing so. I can guarantee you one thing, suddenly. Even if you don't do anything, there will be people who curse you. The more famous you get, the more hate you will receive. Some people will even resent you. That's not the end of it. There will be a ton of people who are going to try to use you. Words he had heard in the past brushed past his head. Because you're trying to jump ahead. Despite how horrible she was, Sial Jihu still thought it was worth it to try and lead her. Although he failed magnificently the first time, he tried to learn from it and searched for a way to improve. However, it was the same in Stage 2. Hey, Tilda, are you mad, Tilda? In truth, he knew the reason. Just like Kim Hannah said, the world wasn't so simple and clear, and he thoroughly realized this through the banquet. Ego, what are we gonna do, Tilda? Our prince is really angry, Tilda. Giving one did not guarantee receiving one. Stealing two did not require giving two either. Okay, I was too harsh. Stop being so angry. Here, let's shake hands and make up. It was the same with human relationships. There were those who expressed gratitude for a show of goodwill, but there were also those who considered it a right. There were people like O'Rahi who were quick to understand and people like Audrey Basler who ignored everything. Prince Tilda? Thus, the world wasn't a golden rule. If the world operated under the law of equivalent exchange, then it would be dyed golden. Are you ignoring me? So what should he do? If words didn't do any good, what method should he use? What are you so worried about? The answer was simple. After all, he was looking at it every single day. It's easy. Just come to a decision by tomorrow morning and we can do things your way. He shouldn't be waiting or searching for the golden rule. You understand me, right? He had to become the golden rule. Did you get that? He had no intention of playing the role of an ally of justice. He wasn't trying to become someone who was strong against the strong and weak against the weak. Ah, this fucker is ignoring me like some mud on the streets. It was just that, if the world was like this, if this was the world he lived in, how boring. Although he might be late, he would have to adapt to it properly. No emotions, Tilda, no fun, Tilda, I'm out. Before he noticed, the sky of the vast field was shining in a golden light, the golden commandment. Right. Everything according to the golden commandment, your chaotic level of cognition. And thus, changes to golden rule, moderate actions and thoughts are sensible, hard-working, /awakening /golden rule to treat others as they have treated you, the moment his standard was set. Sit. Sial Jihu threw off his mask. HM? Audrey Basler's steps halted. I'm not done talking. She turned back. A look of ecstasy spread on her face, almost as if she was thinking he's finally reacting. Without a doubt, she was enjoying the situation. Fine. Then he had to enjoy it as well. Tilda getting feisty, eh? I said sit. When Sial Jihu walked forward, Audrey Basler's head slowly tilted up. The youth stopped right in front of her. When he glared down, Audrey Basler's serpentine eyes curled like crescent moons. Scary, scary, you gonna hit me? I won't say it a third time, Sial Jihu said in a low voice. Kick. Blink, blink. Basler closed and opened her eyes twice before snorting. I don't want to. As if she found the youth to be laughably funny, her face distorted venomously. She yacked. I was going to let it slide, but you must really be out of your mind. It was then. Who the hell are you to tell me what to? Thwack. Basler suddenly plunked down as her eyes widened. Unable to withstand the instantaneous shock, she fell on her butt and pressed her temples at the pain flooding in. Looking up with a scowl, she saw the youth's fist. Only then did she realize what happened. She was flustered only for a moment. Hey, that bastard! A few of her comrades tried to step forward but stopped when Basler signaled them with her hand. Wow! With her butt still touching the ground, she slowly opened her mouth. Confident, eh, Prince? It must be nice to have so many friends. The smirk never left her face. You finally showed your true colors. Fine, I'll bark like you want me to do. I don't see why not. What? You want me to wag my tail too, like this? She got on her hands and knees and began to shake her butt. The one in the minority, like the poor old me, have to do this to survive. She sneered while emphasizing the word minority. This isn't enough. You're not satisfied. You really want me to bark. She then opened and closed her mouth repeatedly, pretending to bark. Knowing why she was doing this, Seol Jihu replied with a calm smile. Sounds good, do it? Huh, bark. Audrey Basler's eyes widened. Since we're doing this, let's do it right. Ah, how about you pee as well, with one leg up, of course. What? For every problem, there was a bottom line that could not be crossed. Audrey Basler's mischievous face contorted indescribably. Ha! She paused completely. She then dropped her head and slowly got up. Hia, you have quite the taste. You wanted to act like a dog, didn't you? I'm just giving good suggestions. You must really think you're something special because I keep calling you Prince. Oi! Playfulness disappeared from her expression. One of her eyebrows perked up. You sure you can handle it? Looks like you're greatly mistaken here. We're not staying still because we're afraid of you. We're afraid of them, the triads, Yumi Tsubaim and Carp Diem. Got it? Seol Jihu smirked. Huh, you think it's funny? Sure, go ahead, laugh all you want, but things will be different once we go back to paradise. Really? Seol Jihu crossed his arms leisurely. If it's just you, I think I alone am more than enough. Oh, Basler rejoiced as if she had been waiting for these words. Is that your pride as a man? Looks like you have balls, then you want to fight, without anyone interfering from our teams, of course. She stealthily distanced herself and raised her guard up like a boxer. Seeing this with a vacant look, Seol Jihu threw away his ice spear and lightly dusted his hands. Ha! Audrey Basler chuckled. You must have seen a lot of Mo. She quickly lowered her upper body and finished. Vise. Then she abruptly bolted to the side before charging forward in an ambush. She shot forward like a ray of light, but in the next moment, her proud face became blank. Along with the sound of the air bursting, the youth, who had been standing in a defenseless state, instantly rushed in. When? Thwack, with a clear striking sound, Basler's head forcefully turned. Her body also tilted and she spun in the air. But before she could mutter out a single cry, her left eye turned hot. Cuke! As expected of a high-level archer, she didn't fall. However, she had already lost her balance. Why? Next, another dull blow struck her head. A short cry rang out. In the end, she stumbled down once again. She quickly lost her composure. With her head drooped low, she fell into despair. She couldn't believe what was happening. She knew the youth was strong, but how could an archer lose out in speed to a warrior of the same level? That was simply impossible. You! As if she couldn't accept the result, she tumbled up and brought one hand to her thigh. Pang! The sound of the air bursting rang out again. Seol Jihu shot forward twice as fast as before and kicked her hand, which was pulling out a dagger. The kicked hand flailed in the air, and she could see Seol Jihu with his right hand pulled back. Kayak! When his punch landed, Basler covered her eyes as if her vision had been mudded. Regardless, if, like you say, we sacrifice, Seol Jihu spoke calmly and didn't stop punching. The 32 people. Her nose was smashed in, causing blood to spurt out. Only 30 out of the 78 people can leave. Her cheekbones sunk in, and the remaining 48 will have to fight again. And what? And fresh blood flowed out from her burst lips. I'll find out in the morning. A straight filled with rage shot out. It smashed her mouth and 3 or 4 teeth trickled down. The fuck is that supposed to mean? Seeing her lowered head, Seol Jihu struck her head. Basler once again fell to the ground. It seemed she hadn't lost her consciousness as she staggered up. However, she tripped over her own feet and fell on her butt once again. "Oh, oh." Basler's comrades, who thought she was simply playing around, realized the gravity of the situation. They exchanged quick glances with each other. "Oi, that's enu, MHM, that's enough out of you too." Hearing an interfering voice from a close distance, the man who was taking out his weapon froze. He could feel someone wrapping their arm around his neck. When he creaked his head back, he saw a neatly dressed man biting down on a cigarette. "Don't think you interfering in a one-on-one fight is cheating." Before he noticed, the members of the triads had all gathered behind him. "Don't you agree, friend?" Hao Win winked at the man he had his arm around and puffed out a smoke. The man furrowed his brows. "But he's going to F. Ha!" At that moment, something black tore through the white smoke and stopped right in front of his face. What was that? Hugo had shoved his face with his hand over his ear. Crack. When he heard the man grit his teeth, he nodded his head and exclaimed, "Aha, you want to get beaten up?" Hick. The man hiccuped. Hugo and the triads were both famous for their cruelty. Kazuki. He called Ainz Kazuki, who usually held a moderate position. HM? But when he saw Kazuki loading his crossbow with bolts, he couldn't help but close his mouth shut. As a result, Xiao Jihu was able to do what had to be done without any interference. "Get up." "Hua!" An airy sound came out. Because Xiao Jihu had repeatedly struck her face, her hair was disheveled and her face was plastered with blood. "Get up. I don't want to hear you making excuses later like you tripped or something. Hoo-hoo." Not getting up, Xiao Jihu stomped forward and snatched her ponytail up. "Oh." After forcefully picking her up by her hair, he lightly pushed her body. Snake eyes bobbed back and forth before she took a few steps back. This time, it wasn't to distance herself for battle. It was out of complete fear. Thwack. Cuck. When he struck the back of her neck, a breath-severing sound came out. Basler no longer remembered how many times she had fallen. "Get up." Her knocked-down body twitched. When the youth's footsteps got close, her arms and legs flailed in desperation. Basler swam through the grass field before barely managing to flip herself over and hugging Xiao Jihu's ankle. SB wear me." Because of her broken teeth, the sound of a flute rang out with her words. I'm sorry, SB wear me." With her eyes dyed from bluish-red bruises, she begged for her life while reeking of blood. Xiao Jihu spoke calmly. "Get up." Hearing his cold voice, Basler grimaced. Tears of blood continued to fall from her eyes. I wa do ask you show peeweesh. Barwa, wan. Wan. She even barked for real. Xiao Jihu was about to pick her up by her collar when a conspicuous light caught his attention, her color. When he checked her color in stage 1, she had been yellow attention required. It remained the same until now when it suddenly began to change. From yellow to colorless. This wasn't the first time someone's color changed. He had seen Teresa's color change from colorless to gold. However, this was the first time he was seeing a color of danger change. Looking down with a fixed gaze, Xiao Jihu squatted down. He raised her chin with his index finger until they met eyes. Seeing the eyes completely succumb to fear, he could guess why the color changed. Was this really necessary to get you to understand? Why couldn't you have just listened when I spoke nicely? It's not like I told you to go die alone. It was so that everyone could live. Basler was trembling intensely and barely managing to look at him in the eye, but when she heard the calmness in his voice, goosebumps suddenly shot up on her body. She couldn't believe she was looking at the same youth she saw in stage 1. Let's be honest, you knew it too. He most certainly wasn't speaking to just Audrey Basler. Seeing Snake Eyes nodding her head crazily, Xiao Jihu stood up. Let me add one more condition. He looked back at the majority faction and wiped the sweat on his forehead. Because of the blood and flesh covering his hand, a line of blood was drawn across his forehead. Audrey Basler and her 5 teammates. We will consider them as part of the minority faction when we're forming the teams. He was basically saying he would split up Snake Eyes and her team so they wouldn't have any other intentions. Also, Xiao Jihu continued, if anyone has a better idea, I'm open to discussion. He was telling them to speak out now if they had any problems. Suddenly, a muffled cackle rang out. Orehi had her head dropped with her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook for a while before she finally got up. She walked toward the youth with light steps before scrutinizing him from top to bottom. When she kept staring at him, Seol Jihu opened his mouth first. "Is there a problem?" No, it's not about that. HNNNG. With a long hum, O'Rahi shrugged. "I want to be in the first team that enters the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. Is that okay?" Looking at Audrey Bassler, who was shaking like a bug, she burst into laughter. "I'm sure you've heard of the saying that the first button has to be fastened right. In exchange for going in first, I'll make sure to bring them all out." Seol Jihu took a deep breath. With her statement, the conference had come to a decision. With O'Rahi, one of the strongest members of the majority faction, agreeing, the scale had been tipped in his favor. "We can decide during the team conference." She seemed to completely agree with all his conditions. And as long as she didn't violate any rule, Seol Jihu had no qualms with letting her go first. "Should I take her?" O'Rahi asked as she glanced at Snake Eyes. She seemed to be saying she would keep an eye on her. Surely it was a sign of goodwill. No. However, Seol Jihu shook his head. Trusting Bassler just because her color changed was a foolish thing to do. "We will take Audrey Bassler." "Are you sure?" "Of course." "Cho-hong?" Cho-hong raised her hand as if she had been waiting for this moment. She quickly approached them while dragging her intimidating thorn of steel on the grass field. "Please." Yeah, I just gotta take care of her until the end of the banquet, right?" As Seol Jihu had already asked for help, she agreed right away. She picked up her mace and rested it on her shoulder before glaring at Bassler, who was still on the ground. "The fuck are you glaring at me for? Drop your eyes." Seeing Snake Eyes bite her lips, Cho-hong let out a chuckle before suddenly turning serious. "Oi, drop your eyes, fucking bitch. You want me to blow your head off?" The crazies often recognized each other. Feeling Cho-hong's chilling, madness-drenched aura, Bassler gulped hard. Soon she lowered her gaze along with her head. Cho-hong grinned. "Look forward to it. I'll personally take care of you until the banquet ends." Cho-hong dragged Audrey Bassler's sagging body away. Having watched the scene play from beginning to end with keen interest, O'Rahi asked with a meaningful smile. "What's your last name?" "Didn't I tell you? You only told me your given name. So, Kim Seol? Yi Seol." Seol Jihu's eyes spun at the abrupt question. He then let out a long sigh before opening his mouth. "No, Seol is my last name. My name is..." After picking up the ice spear, Seol Jihu took a look around his surroundings. Most people had not gotten up from their seats. Another thing that changed was the atmosphere. Kazuki with a calm face, the 32 minority members with flustered expressions as if they didn't think Seol Jihu would go this far, and the 78 majority with tired looks. "My name is..." facing the numerous gazes that were all pointing towards him. "Jihu." The youth smiled lightheartedly. "I'm Seol Jihu, Chapter 127. Seol Jihu 4. Once the frightening conference came to an end, the following matters progressed smoothly. The 78 members of the majority were split into 7 teams around the highly acclaimed organizations, while the 32 members of the minority were distributed evenly into each team. The organizers didn't forget to split up Audrey Bassler and the 5 members of her team, and once the 6 people to enter the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish were chosen, the preparation was over. Hugo was chosen from the Alliance team, and O'Rahi was chosen to become the person in charge just as she wanted. Although missing a battle-specialized high ranker and 3 level 4s left a hole in their forces, there wasn't anything they could do about it. Standing in front of the Plaza of Sacrifice, Seol Jihu pressed down on his chest. Focusing on his pounding heart, he collected his breath. He had only now taken the first step. To lead the participants to the scene he had drawn in his head, he had to overcome a few more obstacles. The first conquering of the Plaza of Sacrifice had to be achieved with as little damage as possible, and the 6 people entering the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish had to come back safely. It would be a lie to say he wasn't worried, especially since he couldn't manage everything directly. However, the die had been cast. Now he had no choice but to believe. Seol Jihu stared at the 6-person group waiting in front of the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish before taking the lead and making his way into the hole in front of him. All 104 people entered the Plaza of Sacrifice. Unlike the first time they entered it, they were organized into a formation. It was the result of a rule being established. The 7 teams entered in order and marked the door they were put in charge of. Naturally, a circular defensive wall was created. Soon, the doors opened, and black shadows began to appear. The archers who had their weapons preloaded immediately attacked, but their arrows failed to penetrate the edges of the arena. Gasps rang out when they fell to the ground after hitting what seemed to be an invisible wall. If the participants focus-fired the monsters as they were stepping out of the doors, the fight would definitely go much smoother. However, the Plaza of Sacrifice had cast an invisible barrier, as if such a thing was not allowed. In the end, the participants had no choice but to watch the enemies leisurely walk out and surround the arena. Xiao Jihu furrowed his brows when he caught sight of the monsters' appearances. They were 2 meters tall, and the way they were full of muscles from head to toe, it felt wrong to simply describe them as muscular. The tendons on their log-sized neck bulged out, making anyone watching sigh. Colorful war paint adorned their faces, and tusk-like fangs protruded out from their mouth. At first glance, they looked similar to the mutant orcs Xiao Jihu had seen in the laboratory. However, the color of their skin was different. The mutant orcs had ash-gray skin, while the monsters in front of them were painted green. "Orcs," Kazuki's voice rang out. With a rare, flustered face, he was unable to hide his nervousness. "Impossible. The orcs went extinct more than 10 years ago." The Orcs of Paradise once boasted a powerful tribal nation capable of easily overwhelming the human kingdoms. The race that had gone extinct after the fall of the Empire was alive. It was hard to believe, but the orcs didn't seem interested in waiting for them to collect their thoughts. Soldiers carrying adult human-sized shields stepped out to the front. The ones carrying spears stood behind them, followed by orcs carrying longbows. 2 orcs especially caught everyone's attention. They were at least a head bigger than other orc warriors and boasted much bigger bodies. There was even an orc wearing a flabby black robe while holding a faded wooden staff. Its long, white beard was especially telling of its aged wisdom. "Looks like we should assassinate that one first." Xiao Jihu could hear Kazuki's murmur. While the youth was watching the orcs march out into the arena, he suddenly felt something touching his back. "Xiao." Kazuki pointed at another door and quickly continued. "I want to send Chung Chohong to the orc champion. Will that be okay?" He seemed to be referring to the 2 giant orcs. One had come out of the door the Alliance team was in charge of, while the other had come out from another door. The team in charge of that entrance consisted of several level 4s, but had no high rankers. The teams were formed under the guideline of equally splitting up the 32 minority members. But since everyone agreed to move members around depending on the situation, sending Chohong over shouldn't be a problem. However, Kazuki bothered to ask Xiao Jihu, and Xiao Jihu knew the reason. "What nonsense is that? If I remember correctly, orc champions are elite bodyguards of the Orc Lord, which rivals a unique ranker in power. At the very least, they should be as strong as lioner heads, though they're likely to be stronger. But why do I have to go? Why can't you?" "Chohong." Chohong was arguing with Kazuki when Xiao Jihu's soft voice made her pause. "No, I mean, we barely managed to grab this chance." His somewhat desperate voice put her at a loss for words. "Please." Chohong realized that this wasn't the time to be stubborn. She let out a long sigh. "I'll come back as soon as I kill that bastard." "You don't have to." "Why?" "Because Kazuki the priest and I will kill ours first." Hearing this, Chohong chuckled. She then turned to Audrey Bassler, who was staring at the orcs with a gloomy face. "Oi, come here." "Come here," I said. "Is there a worm stuck in your ear?" Chohong swung her hand angrily. Snake Eyes ended up being smacked in the head and looked back dumbfounded, but Chohong simply glared back. "Man, this bitch's eyes get on my nerves every time I look at them. Hey, didn't I tell you not to open your eyes like that?" Audrey Bassler looked as if she had been wronged, but Xiao Jihu ignored her plight and glared at her coldly. He saw it as a good chance for her to walk in her victim's shoes. Perhaps she might learn how the 32 minority members felt from the insensitive remark she made at the conference. "Remember, I'm in charge of you until the end of the banquet." Chohong growled before quickly taking off with the back of Snake Eye's neck in her hand. Soon, two people came over to the Alliance team and exchanged the white headband girl's nameless older brother and a lean youth with a bow. "Thank you. Things were looking dark for us. Thank you so much." The male archer bowed his head and expressed his gratitude. He seemed to be touched because a high ranker specialized in battle had been sent to help them. Once the team members successfully switched, Xiao Jihu quickly returned to analyzing the situation. The enemies seemed to have finished coming out as the plaza doors were closed. He could count around 120 orcs, which was fewer in number compared to the 150 lioners the participants had to face. However, considering that the plaza's difficulty should be the same, this wasn't something to be happy about. Unlike the lioners that continuously charged in, each orc was equipped with dazzling armor, and the group was marching uniformly like a well-trained army. When the old, robed orc standing in the middle waved his staff left and right, the white part of the orc's eyes turned crimson and drool began to flow down from their mouth. Their already vicious faces became a step thicker with belligerence, and they began to strike the ground while roaring out. The orc champions raised battle axes in each of their hands and opened their mouths wide. Q-woo-woo-woo, Q-woo-woo-woo. Two terrifying howls resounded in the plaza. Because of the enclosed area, the orc champions' roars echoed frighteningly. Just their screams delivered an ear-splitting and skin-slicing pain, causing everyone to scowl. Because of the endlessly continuing howls, a few people even failed to carry their weight and staggered. Xiao Jihu furrowed his brows at the unpleasant sensation of his brain shaking. But in the next moment, he found his mind and body calming down. This wasn't because of his ice spear's calming effect. What he was feeling wasn't the spear shaft's coldness. Instead, a warm energy was traveling through him and soothed his tense body. Xiao Jihu let out the breath he had been holding in. Then he heard a soft chant. Turning around subconsciously, he saw the robed priest reaching out toward him and chanting quietly. The howls stopped. Xiao Jihu realized that the invisible barrier disappeared. "They're coming." Kazuki muttered briefly. Immediately, the orc archers all raised their bows and knocked their arrows. In return, the human archers fired their arrows as if they had been waiting for this moment. The arrows from each side crossed paths before raining down like a sudden shower. The orcs all got on one knee behind their shields, while the priests also cast the barrier they had readied. As both sides had been prepared for this exchange, none got injured. However, this was only the signal for the start of battle. KRRG. Orc warriors shot up as the orc champions raised their war battle axes. When they began to march forward, maintaining their initial formation, the humans also roared and shot forward. Finally, a 7-front battle started. In front of Xiao Jihu were 18 orcs. After running in with his shield out in front, he extended his spear at the nearing orcs. Before his spear made contact, one orc warrior tilted its shield slightly, parrying the attack and pushing the spear away. Xiao Jihu was startled by the orc's delicate technique, but soon regained his composure. He might have let go of his spear in the past, but he was different now. He grit his teeth, tightened his grip on the spear shaft, and swung down. Weak. When the blade of his spear severed the orc's helmeted head in half, the orc dropped his shield. However, before he could enjoy the pleasant sensation on his hand, several spears flew forward from behind the falling orc. Xiao Jihu was about to quickly fall back when several small discs radiating white light covered him, and they flung away the spears that were about to skewer him. Even Xiao Jihu was surprised when he saw this. That had been the first time he saw so many barriers generated at once. That wasn't all. The orcs that were about to attack again froze. Movement freezing, Xiao Jihu didn't miss this opportunity. He stabbed his spear into the neck of a struggling orc, and then sliced off the head of a teeth-bearing orc standing next to it. Even as he continued to swing his spear, he couldn't hide his shock. The barriers were one thing, but fighting such powerful orcs for a long period of time seemed impossible without a terrifying amount of mana. As long as they stay like this, there was no easier target than one frozen still. Sial Jihu accurately aimed for their vital spots, and the once confident orcs dropped like flies. Sial Jihu had sent 4 orcs to the river Styx just like that. But his attacking paused in the next moment. It wasn't that something happened to him. He only felt a stimulating glare. However, that was enough to make him feel a terrifying pressure. He quickly fell back, distancing himself from the orcs. As soon as he looked around, his body froze stiff. From nearby, the orc champion was staring at him fixedly. Now that he was looking at it up close, it looked even bigger than before. Right, the pressure it gave off was truly overwhelming. It felt like just staring at it made his bladder crumple up. Moreover, its crimson eyes dyed in madness retained great curiosity at the human warrior slaughtering its subordinates. The monster grinned and pointed its dual battle axes at him. Sial Jihu reflexively raised his spear. Next, the orc champion took a step forward. It was then, boom. From a single leap, an air-severing sound exploded out. In a split second, the orc champion got within an arm's reach of Sial Jihu. It spread its arms out and leapt forward like a leopard. Kakang, kakang, sharp noises struck his ears. Terrified out of his senses, Sial Jihu darted back before even figuring out what happened. No, it was more correct to say he was pushed back. How? However, the orc champion continued to charge forward as if it refused to give the youth any time to think. What drove Sial Jihu even crazier was that he was retreating in a straight line, while the orc champion was chasing him in a zigzag. Even so, the distance between them wasn't getting any wider. The orc champion's movements didn't suit its huge body at all. Taking irregular footsteps left and right, it struck with its dual axes haphazardly. The constant flashing of the axes made Sial Jihu's mind reel. Cuke! He put strength into his eyes and barely managed to grasp the situation. The white discs had protected his body multiple times from the orc champion's lethal attacks. When he thought about how he would be minced meat without the white discs, he felt a chill run down his back. He's strong, KRRR. The monster suddenly stopped charging and turned its dissatisfied gaze to the center. It knew it could have finished off the human warrior. Since the white discs were hindering it at crucial moments, it couldn't help but get irritated. When it turned back to Sial Jihu again, it wore an apathetic expression like it was looking at a small fry. Almost as if it was done with Sial Jihu with the previous exchange, it frowned with a bothersome look before letting out a short roar. Whining, whining, whining. Blade-like winds shot out from the battle axe in its right hand. Just as Sial Jihu barely fixed his posture, he felt himself trembling from the sharp wind. He shook off his fear with effort and focused on the enemy in front of him. But how was he supposed to beat it? The difference in their physical level didn't need to be mentioned, and he could hardly read its attacks. Still, he refused to be pushed around endlessly. Thud, thud. Seeing the giant body running forward, he summoned the blessing of the circum and, with a sidestep, extended his spear in a sweeping manner. He planned to use the orc champion's straight charge against itself, but the orc champion perked up its brows and snorted. Thwack. The moment a dull impact struck the spear shaft, Sial Jihu's arms were pushed backward along with his body. He was stunned, both physically and mentally. Never mind the pain seemingly tearing his hands apart. It wasn't as if he let his guard down. He had given it his all. But a single terrifying blow had paralyzed his arms and left his mind stunned. Then, before he could do anything, boom, an explosive sound rang out on his face. Chapter 128. Sial Jihu, 5. Even without looking, he could tell where the sound came from. The orc champion had swung its axe the moment Sial Jihu lost balance. A disc just barely managed to block the blade, but the shockwave sent Sial Jihu's hair flying back. The sharp winds pierced through the discs, and facing the merciless wind pressure ravaging his face, Sial Jihu shut his eyes. When he opened them back up, he realized his body was in the air. He flew like a car frantically driving in reverse until he eventually struck the wall. Thud, pew-hup. Blood spurted out of Sial Jihu's mouth as he suffered internal damage. With his blurred vision, he could see the orc champion striking down with his battle axe. It was then, click, click. Sharp sounds of a chain shot toward the monster's neck. Just as a chained scythe was about to hit its neck, the orc champion struck it down with his arm without even looking back. Chet! A giant clicked his tongue and pulled his chain back. 10 or so arrows immediately followed. The orc champion, which was about to end the puny insect's life, couldn't help but grit its teeth and fall back. But where had all these reinforcements come from? Krrr. Its nose twitched, and then it quickly scanned its rear. After seeing that the old orc had been decapitated, it finally realized the cause for the unusual change. The orc shaman had been killed while it was focused on the weakling who he mistakenly thought was strong. When the orc champion saw Kazuki darting away from where the orc shaman used to stand, it let out an angry snort. "Hurry up and take him!" The giant man swinging his chain in a circle shouted. Lara Wolf ran in while being covered by others. She grabbed the legs of the sporadically convulsing youth and pulled on him frantically. Of course, Sial Jihu couldn't recognize anything happening around him. He was in a state of complete bewilderment, like a TV screen full of miscellaneous signals. Concussion and seizure. He needs immediate treatment. He could faintly make out a few words. The orc champion's power surpasses my expectations. Can you do anything about it? I'm sorry, I cannot use power beyond that of a high ranker as long as I'm inside the banquet, even though you used a divine wish. People who cleared the banquet cannot enter it again. I could bend the rules using a divine wish, but a restriction has been placed on my abilities. A conversation he couldn't understand flowed out. First, he felt a soft touch enveloping his face. A warm sensation flowed into his body and his vision focused. Sial Jihu opened his eyes and saw Kazuki's face. "Are you okay?" Sial Jihu picked himself back up. His body was drenched. At first he thought it was blood, but he then realized it was sweat. When he lowered his head, cold sweat dripped down. He also felt a bit exhausted. Although the battle was short, this was proof that he had been pushed to a corner and expended much mental energy. His hand fumbled on the ground, searching for his spear. Seeing this, Kazuki opened his mouth. "Don't worry. The man you saved is surprisingly skilled. He's holding up with a hit-hand switch tactic." Sial Jihu quickly grasped how the battle was playing out. The orcs' fighting spirit had died down greatly. Their crimson eyes had also returned to their original color. The most important thing was that the old orc in the back was killed. He was wondering why Kazuki wasn't supporting him. It seemed that he had gone to assassinate the orc shaman. Kazuki placed his hand on the youth's shoulder. "Good job. You did well, truly. Thanks to you, we are now in an advantageous position." These weren't empty words. Although the robed priest played a huge role, Sial Jihu was the one who caught the orc champion's attention and fought it directly. Thanks to him, Kazuki was able to assassinate the orc shaman without the orc champion finding out, but it was too early to celebrate. Most of the orc warriors were alive, and the orc champion was still kicking. The giant and the 6 others were barely keeping the orc champion in check under the priest's support. The orc champion's power was truly incredible. And in reality, its physical power surpassed that of most high rankers. A true high ranker like Orahi might be needed to fight it on an even ground. Even then, there was a chance that she would lose. Victory wasn't guaranteed. Right. Kazuki couldn't deny that Sial Jihu did a good job. However, the result people were expecting from him was no longer that of a level 3 warrior. "You think you can go on?" Kazuki chose his words carefully as he knew how overwhelming it was to take on the orc champion's attacks. Sial Jihu trembled. All humans possessed a primitive fear. Sial Jihu was no different. The orc champion's consecutive axe attacks, its wind-using ability, and its charging power. As someone who had experienced them all, fear crept up inside Sial Jihu. A part of him wanted to dump everything onto Kazuki. Since he toiled away until now, he wanted to leave things to others and run away. But he knew he couldn't. If he did, he would be no different than Audrey Bassler. He was the one who convinced people to enter this place. He was also the one who agreed to send Chohong, their strongest fighter, to another team. Regardless of the process, he was the one who led 110 people into this place as a result. Thus, Mr. Kazuki. He had to repay what he received. I can't fight him for long. We need to settle it in one go. Xiao Jihu admitted inwardly that he alone was incapable of handling this monster. He had to borrow others' strength. You want to go for the kill in one exchange? Yes. Can you create an opening? Kazuki nodded before turning back to the orc champion. Xiao Jihu seemed to have regained his composure as he calmly gazed at the orc champion, readying his posture. I can do it once. Kazuki threw away his crossbow and took out a deep purple longbow. I used 2 shots to kill the orc shaman, so I only have 1 left. He muttered as he knocked an arrow onto the long, pole-sized bow. Even while they were chatting, several people were risking their lives to buy Xiao Jihu enough time to recover. There was no time to hesitate or waste. Let's go. Kazuki aimed his bow. Xiao Jihu bit his lower lip. Looking back, he had been too helpless. It was true that the orc champion was powerful, but he failed to bring out his full potential due to fear. From the moment they first crossed weapons, he got too intimidated and was busy running away, don't forget. Training is a battle, sir. Xiao Jihu recalled Zhang Maldong's words and tightened his grip on his spear. He suppressed the mana wildly flickering around it. Go! Ping! The moment Kazuki let go of the bowstring, Xiao Jihu shot forward like a ray of light. The arrow drew an arc in the air before gliding down like a bird. The orc champion was already enraged to the limit. No matter how many mayflies gathered together, in the end, they were just mayflies. But every time the orc champion tried to do something, the disc-shaped barriers blocked his attacks, frustrating him endlessly. Swish. With a short slashing sound, a chilling energy reached it. The orc champion glanced up before instantly jumping back. At a glance, it looked like the orc champion was trying to get out of the range of the arrow. From a common-sense standpoint, it was impossible for a fired arrow to change its course. However, high rankers had the power to alter common sense. The arrow hurling downward wiggled like a living creature just before it touched the ground. Next, like a swallow sailing up, the arrow drew a clear arc and chased after the fleeing enemy. After finally catching up, the pole-like arrow grazed the orc champion's Achilles tendon, and Kazuki immediately shot past the orc champion while slicing its right shin. He had snuck forward while the enemy's attention was drawn to the arrow and landed a perfectly timed attack. Clearly, he had planned out the entire move to restrict the orc champion's movement. Thinking that he succeeded, Kazuki turned back to check. However, the orc champion wasn't paying any attention to Kazuki or the arrow. It was only staring out front in a daze. Kazuki examined the monster once more. Now that he thought about it, he felt like the arrow missed its mark by a slight margin, and even his dagger had only cut him lightly. Next, when he saw the orc champion's beast-like glare, Kazuki went, "Ah!" The orc champion had not run back to dodge the arrow. It was the opposite. Knowing that Xiao Jihu was aiming for it, it had cleverly fallen back to gain momentum and reduce the damage it received. The orc champion stomped down with its right foot, almost as if to sneeringly say, "Did you just find out?" Then, it strongly kicked off the ground. Shoot! Seeing the orc champion leap forward like performing a long jump, Kazuki realized he made the wrong judgment. He shouldn't have killed the orc shaman. Even though the orc champion would have been stronger, it was much better to have it in a state of madness. Now, while its physical prowess had been reduced, it had regained its intelligence. That wasn't the worst part. If a monstrosity like the orc champion noticed Kazuki's plan, it most certainly would have calculated its following moves. As if to prove this, it had already gone past the range of a priest's normal barrier. Now, only the discs could protect Xiao Jihu. But the orc champion had been bothered by the discs the entire time. How could it not have put them into its calculations? Kazuki was filled with despair. The moment Xiao Jihu entered the attacking range of the orc champion, he would die without a doubt. Fall back. Kazuki shouted at the top of his lungs, but Xiao Jihu was charging forward from the moment Kazuki fired his arrow. He had even used the final charge of the Festina earring. And when the orc champion stopped retreating and suddenly shot forward, Xiao Jihu was taken aback. He planned to chase after it and drill a hole in its chest with an aura-infused thrust. However, the orc champion had closed the distance between them with a sinister smile. As if it knew what Sial Jihu planned to do, it was clearly saying it would finish him off. By the time Sial Jihu realized this, the orc champion was already making its move. It carefully watched where the white discs were being created and left leeway in its movements to change course. Sial Jihu still couldn't read its attacks. However, he could guess what would happen next from the devastating wind pressure striking against him. His head turned blank and his eyes also became vacant. Ah, just when he thought, this is it. Don't forget, training is a battle. A calm voice brushed past his head. Brat, stop trying to do things without a plan and use your head. I told you not to move from that spot. But I never told you not to move at all. Seeing the orc champion's right arm swinging down, Sial Jihu ducked to the left. That's it. A sharp, prickling sensation grazed past him. The orc champion still had the same bored look it did before. After all, it had more than one weapon. And as if to say, what's the point of dodging? It swung down its other axe at the insect ducking down. In reality, Sial Jihu didn't even know he barely dodged the first attack. And this time, he didn't even have the chance to see the orc champion's arm, but he intuitively knew that the orc champion's attack wasn't over. After all, he could see Kazuki running toward him with a frightening face, and more importantly, he was feeling a clear, prickling sensation on his neck. Sial Jihu's head was empty, but just as he had learned and as his instincts led him, Sial Jihu instantly straightened his back halfway and ducked to the right reflexively. Swish! Could this be what it felt like to have a fiercely spinning chainsaw graze past oneself? Good job. As chills ran down the backs of everyone watching, Kazuki stopped running. A look of shock spread across his face, enough to make him forget everything. What? The first attack was one thing, but the second follow-up attack should have been checkmate. No matter how he saw it, it should have been impossible to avoid. Not only did the orc champion time it perfectly, but unless one had eyes behind their head, there was no way to tell which direction it was coming from. However, the youth had dodged it. He had crossed over with an acrobatic movement and avoided the attack by a paper-thin margin. Kazuki witnessed the entire scene, yet he was still full of doubts. It was as if the youth had moved intuitively. Could it be? Kazuki's jaw dropped. He learned intuition. Even dodging Jang Maldong's wooden logs 10,000 times might not allow one to obtain this ability. Even among the gifted, it was said that only a small minority could obtain this marvelous ability. If the onlookers were this surprised, how shocked would the involved parties be? The orc champion, who now had both its arms crossed downward, looked confused. Its first attack had been a feint to draw out the white disc. It hadn't even considered the insect in front of it to dodge. While both friend and foe were in states of disbelief, Sial Jihu was also wrapped up in a strange sensation. To be precise, he was feeling the wind that touched him while he dodged the orc champion's axes. Just like when he was floating in the lake and feeling the flow of the water, he mindlessly focused on the current of wind sweeping past him. Flash step is a technique in which you move instantly, by using the elasticity that comes from bending your body like a bow. Since it uses your entire body, you can say it's closer to a body technique than a foot technique. Coincidentally, his body had been bent. The key is to consume minimal energy. As if he was worried that this sensation would disappear, Sial Jihu roused his mana and controlled it subconsciously. Dividing one large stream into dozens of smaller streams, he evenly spread them through his veins and meridians. Soon, when the streams connected together like a well-woven spider web, Sial Jihu's head shot up. Past his droplets of sweat, he could see the orc champion looking down at him. A refined light flickered from Sial Jihu's eyes as he straightened his bent back. Boom! With an explosive sound, the spear Sial Jihu extended. No, his entire body shot forward. KQDE-yuk! The ice spear penetrated the orc champion's armor and dug into its side. The monster's jaw dropped open. Festina earring and the explosiveness of flash step. Since the attack even came from such a short distance, not even the orc champion could react immediately. When a sharp pain spread through its body, the monster grit its teeth rather than scream. Not yet. Although an unexpected incident occurred, it hadn't lost. It could just endure an injury of this level. It still held onto its weapons, and the enemy was within its range. A weakling like a human should turn to meet paste if it just swung its axe. The orc champion tried to raise its battle axe, but its arm lagged. Before it noticed, the giant man had wrapped his chain around it and was pulling on it. Ki-ee-you. Refusing to give up, the orc champion threw away the axe in its right hand and grabbed the spear stuck in its body. It was then, suddenly, a blue spear filled its vision. Boom, blood spurted out from its nose. Sial-Jehu's mana spear had tilted its chin up, so much so that its helmet flew off. The orc champion even let go of the spear it held in its hand. With a near-dead huff, the monster dropped its head. In the next moment, the orc champion saw the ice spear flickering with blue flames. The thrust. A truly clean and beautiful thrust unraveled. PSSSH. The tip of the spear pierced through the orc champion's solar plexus and exited through its back. The monster's neck wriggled and blood spurted out from its mouth. Strength escaped its lower body. Although its legs bent down, its fierce eyes were still alive. It no longer stared at the youth like some weakling. Almost as if to engrave the visage of the existence marking its end, the orc champion gazed at Sial-Jehu swinging his spear. Soon, its head separated from its body, shooting up into the air and then rolling on the ground. Sial-Jehu drew heavy breaths while staring at the slowly collapsing corpse with widened eyes. Thud. The muscular body fell to the ground and created a small rumbling. The orc champion had finally fallen, and, confirming the death of one of their commanders, the orc warriors became disarrayed. This couldn't be helped. There was a clear difference between the orc warriors and the orc champions. Comparing them to a nation's army, they were foot soldiers and generals, respectively. But the general receiving their absolute trust had just been executed by a mere 1,000-man, no, 100-man commander. How could they not be shocked? Not only did they falter back hesitantly, but some even dropped their weapons. Kazuki clenched his fists. The moment Sial-Jehu had dodged the orc champion's second attack, goosebumps shot up all over his body and he could no longer hold himself back. Sial, he shot his hand up. Carp deems Sial-Jehu has defeated the orc champion, and he shouted out loud, Chapter 129. The true intent of the banquet, Sial-Jehu still had his eyes widened. Soon the fierce light in his eyes subsided and he fell into a daze. I won, he checked once again. Perhaps because he had squeezed out every ounce of his strength to swing his spear, the orc champion's head had flown far away, and its body was lying face down on the plaza. I really won. He couldn't believe it no matter how many times he confirmed it. Sial-Jehu was blankly staring into the air when he found a message window floating there. Class ability Flash Step Lowest has been created. I see. I learned Flash Step. Sial-Jehu let out a sigh of relief and looked ahead again. The orc champion had fallen. He had personally cut off its neck. Sial-Jehu had to put in great effort to keep his eyes from closing. The moment he lost his focus, he felt like tears would pour down. Did I cry this easily? He realized he had been crying often ever since he entered paradise. He knew this, yet he still wanted to cry. He didn't think he would win. He thought he would die. Truly, at that moment, a loud shout struck his ears. The sniffling Sial-Jehu jolted in surprise and looked around. The plaza was echoing with the roars of humans. The orcs had lost their fighting spirit and were starting to get pushed back. After seeing all this with a dazed look, Sial-Jehu snapped out and put strength into his numb legs. The war wasn't over yet. Sial-Jehu climbed up to the grass field supported by Kazuki. He had squeezed out every ounce of his strength to fight the orc champion, and because he continued to fight afterward in a groggy state, he was now thoroughly exhausted. But the result spoke for itself. All 110 participants had made it out alive. Of course, most of them were injured in some way, but the result was still fantastic. There were two reasons for this success. The first reason was Kazuki's quick assassination of the orc shaman, and the second, more important reason was Sial-Jehu defeating the orc champion early on. To be precise, they had used the orcs' military system against them. When a commander-class orc fell, the orcs' morale plummeted, and over half of the orc warriors became noticeably weaker. Noticing this change, Kazuki immediately drove the momentum and supported the struggling Chohong. And once they defeated the remaining orc champion, the rest was easy. At first, he thought they were unlucky that the enemies moved in an organized structure. But he got to learn that this could be a good thing as well. Once the fight ended, the priests ran around busily. The ones with lighter injuries drank healing potions, and those with severe injuries had a priest heal them. The atmosphere wasn't bad. At the very least, it was a huge improvement from when each side was on high alert and glaring at each other murderously. Not yet. However, Sial Jihu didn't relax yet. He couldn't even say it's too early to relax. In the first place, the banquet wasn't a place for relaxation. He would have to wait until the damned banquet ended and he went back to paradise before he could sleep peacefully. With a worried gaze, Sial Jihu faced the plaza of the Dissonant Wish. He couldn't see the 6 people who had gone ahead. It hadn't taken Sial Jihu's group hours to finish conquering the Plaza of Sacrifice, but he was expecting O'Rahi's group to have come out already. Don't appear nervous. Seeing Sial Jihu wandering around the pit, Kazuki whispered, "Just sit in front of it and pretend to wait in leisure." It wasn't wait, but pretend to wait. Sial Jihu tilted his head at this distinction, but since it sounded like an advice, he silently sat down. Soon, the anxiously waiting Sial Jihu heard the sound of a door opening. He put down the healing potion he was drinking and got up. He would have run forward if he could, but remembering Kazuki's words, he only stared at the same spot. People began to walk out of the plaza of the Dissonant Wish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Exactly 6 people walked forward while carrying both big and small, cloth-wrapped items. Sial Jihu breathed a sigh of relief, but then realized a strange air flowing between them. O'Rahi looked unhappy about something, while Hugo had his mouth shut from exhaustion. The 2 people chosen from the minority faction also had their spirits crushed. Even without anyone saying a word, he could tell something happened. Sial Jihu let out a bitter smile. He was happy that everyone made it out alive, but that was how Stage 2 atmosphere normally was. Even the group that entered the Plaza of Sacrifice was showing signs of returning to this atmosphere. It was foolish to expect them to join hands and laugh just because they successfully cleared the Plaza of Sacrifice once. Hugo. Why do you look so tired? Are you all right? I'm fine. Rather than that, what took you guys so long? Oh, you see? Hugo glanced at O'Rahi and breathed out a sigh. It was really far. Far? Yeah, the pathway to the room where you could claim the reward was longer than we expected, and once we got there, there were several rooms to choose from. Hugo shook his head. Damn it. Just finding your room takes time, but not only did all 6 of us have to move together, we also had to observe each other. Ugh, he shuddered as if just thinking about it frightened him. Then Chohong sneaked in. Stop overreacting. What are you complaining about after a nice, free meal? Come on, the entire time, I couldn't even talk unless I was allowed to. People could have run away at a moment's notice, and a scary demon with a sword was standing behind me. Do you know how hard it was to try not to pay attention? I thought I was going to die of having all my energy sucked out. It sounded like O'Rahi intimidated them more than she needed to. Sial Jihu could imagine how sinister the atmosphere must have been. Whatever. So what you get. Fuck. What? Don't ask. I'm gonna cry. Hugo waved his hand. Chohong giggled. What, did you get screwed over? Just look at this thing. This place has got to be playing a trick on me. Hugo unwrapped the cloth while complaining. After checking the content, Sial Jihu began to observe the surrounding space. He had finally come this far. He forcefully united the 110 people, performed better than expected on the first conquering of the Plaza of Sacrifice, and had all 6 people return alive from the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish. He was 80% of the way there. It would be great if the rest worked out on its own, but Sial Jihu thought there was a low chance of that happening. He realized this just by remembering how Stage 1 progressed. He had persuaded everyone to work together, but after a while, O'Rahi had suggested that they abandon the level 3s. Similarly, although things were progressing well now, There was no guarantee that everything would end well. Whether big or small, someone was bound to complain somehow, and Sial Jihu expected at least one more incident to come up. So what could he do to prevent this? Sial Jihu found the answer in making the banquet a banquet. When he caught sight of O'Rahi walking through the field, his eyes flickered. Miss O'Rahi. She didn't stop. Perhaps she was too far away to hear him. Miss O'Rahi, he raised his voice, yet she was still unperturbed. He wasn't sure whether she couldn't hear him or if she was ignoring him, but judging by the way she had her arms folded and was walking haughtily, he guessed it was the latter. Sial Jihu cleared his throat and raised his arm. Then he shouted at the top of his lungs, "O'Rahi!" O'Rahi stopped. She creaked her head to the side frighteningly, and Sial Jihu immediately added, "Miss." In the next moment, Sial Jihu faced O'Rahi with a winter storm blowing behind her. "What did you say?" This was the first time he was seeing her so emotional, so he quickly opened his mouth. "Ah, that's your name, right, Miss O'Rahi?" "My last name. Well, I guess you could have heard from Kazuki or someone else. Anyways, you called my name?" "Yes, I called you multiple times, but you didn't turn around, so..." O'Rahi's eyes narrowed. She tilted her head. After a moment of hesitation, she let out a short sigh. "Anyways, I heard you defeated the orc champion." "Huh, ah, yes." Sial Jihu scratched his head. "It's spread already." "I didn't do it alone. It was only possible because of my team's support." "Doesn't that go without saying?" "Who would believe you defeated an orc champion alone? Even I am not confident in doing that." Her tone wasn't condescending or sneering in any way. That was just how she talked. Her tone was actually more close to being surprised. How mysterious. She murmured to herself while sending strange glances at Sial Jihu. "Anyways, what's up?" Sial Jihu was about to ask, "What did you get?" But when he saw what she was holding in her hand, he changed his question. "You wanted a weapon?" He asked as O'Rahi was holding something long and big wrapped in a cloth. "Yeah." O'Rahi nodded faintly. When she untied the cloth knot, a big, long, two-handed axe revealed itself. The flower symbol engraved on the axe head harmonized well with the delicate white light flowing down to the butt, giving the weapon a beautiful, sacred look. An axe? Hilarious, isn't it? O'Rahi looked more than a little disappointed. In paradise, finding a high-quality weapon or armor was difficult. A part of the reason was the fall of the empire, but the bigger reason was a severe lack of material caused by the long, drawn-out war. This was the reason the price of equipment jumped by digits every time one leveled up. Furthermore, it was almost impossible to find a weapon suitable for a high ranker. O'Rahi would have been ecstatic if she had received a longsword on the same level as this axe. But this couldn't be helped. After all, Stage 2 reward was supposed to grant the participants' wish in a dissonant form. "If you're done, can I leave?" "No." What? Hold on." Sial Jihu dragged Hugo over. Sial Jihu noticed that he became dead silent the moment O'Rahi arrived. Sial Jihu smiled brightly and purposely increased the tone of his voice. "You guys want to switch?" "Huh?" O'Rahi looked like she was asking, "What are you talking about all of a sudden?" But when she saw the blood-red longsword in Hugo's hand, she blinked dazedly and went, "Ah." Hugo's eyes also widened when he saw the axe in O'Rahi's hand. Can I see it?" O'Rahi asked first. "Me too." Hugo nodded. The duo then began to examine the weapon they exchanged. "You guys didn't confirm what you got inside." "I told you, we didn't say a word to each other." When Sial Jihu asked, Hugo retorted with an unusual level of concentration. "We didn't have time to either." Hugo murmured in a daze. "Makes sense," Sial Jihu thought. Considering how wary they were of each other, asking "Can I see what you got?" was probably out of the question. In any case, judging by Hugo's entranced face, it seemed that he liked the axe. It was the same for O'Rahi. She carefully scrutinized the blood-red rapier emitting an ominous, demonic sword-like aura. From the way the corner of her mouth was curled up, one could tell how satisfied she was. The two weapons didn't seem to differ too much in functionality, and even if it was, a trade was fair as long as both sides agreed to it. "Your first impression was terrible, but I've been loving everything you do." "Excuse me?" "No, nothing." O'Rahi shook her head. Glancing at Hugo, she asked, "Oi, you." "Huh, how about it?" Hugo raised both of his thumbs up as if he didn't even need to think about the answer. Call. Good, the trade had been completed. Rahi spun the rapier in her hand before caressing the blade with her hand and smiling. Hugo ran around while swinging the axe, like a child who had received his Christmas present. Seeing this, the four people who entered the plaza of the dissonant wish with them didn't sit still. In case someone had an item worth trading for, they began to unwrap their cloth. Then other people began to gather round. When they saw the rewards the 6 people received, they couldn't help but marvel at them. The most sought-after reward among Earthlings, the banquet that magnificently satisfied their interest, soon. One person swallowed his saliva and asked, "When are we selecting the next group of participants?" Hearing this, Sial Jihu grinned with satisfaction. The conquering of the Plaza of Sacrifice hastened. The second attempt ended without anyone dying, mainly due to Rahi playing an active role. She killed more enemies than anyone else, and just as one might expect, it wasn't for an altruistic reason. It turned out that the rapier got stronger and could even restore its user's stamina by drinking blood. When Sial Jihu found out, he was convinced the rapier was a demonic sword of some sort. In any case, the participants were able to conquer the Plaza of Sacrifice 4 times that day and 6 times the next day. They had progressed more than halfway in just 2 days, and on the 6th night, amazing. Kazuki muttered in awe after once again conquering the Plaza of Sacrifice for the 6th time in a single day. I never even imagined something like this on the first day. It was late at night, but dozens of people were gathered together on the grass field. People who were simply watching, people who stopped uninterested traders trying to persuade them, people wondering if they should accept the trade, people haggling. The entire field was rowdy. The way people were gathered around a large campfire, Kazuki felt like he was looking at a festival. "You know, I never even considered trading." It wasn't that he couldn't. He didn't. When Kazuki chuckled, Sial Jihu also laughed. "It's nothing amazing, really. What's surprising is that you considered this possibility in that situation." Kazuki wasn't wrong about this. While everyone else was obsessed with sacrificing others to escape, Sial Jihu alone had the idea of turning the dissonant wish into the harmonious wish. "Well, I just wondered why this place was given the name Banquet when it first opened." Sial Jihu continued, "Banquets are supposed to be fun. Originally, a banquet was a feast where many gathered to celebrate or congratulate. Sial Jihu had interpreted this in a paradisian fashion. I thought about why dissonant wishes were given out, and I thought it was for people to interact with each other and grow closer." Sial Jihu blurred the end of his speech before squatting down with a sigh. Kazuki tilted his head. "Why the sigh?" "Because it's difficult. Even though things went according to your plan." "That's true, but..." Sial Jihu smacked his lips. "To be honest, I got lucky." "Lucky?" "Yes. I could force the situation thanks to several conditions being met. If our allied team wasn't the strongest force here." In truth, Sial Jihu's initial plan was to persuade others by telling them about trading, but after seeing how things were working out, he had used a more forceful approach. He had only taken out the trade card afterwards. Otherwise, nothing he said would have held weight. Kazuki shrugged his shoulders. "If you were the eloquent orator type or the cunning strategist type, things might have gone as you expected. The same can be said if you possessed charisma that can mesmerize people at first glance. If there really are people like that, I'm jealous. But I don't think you were wrong. You don't need to blame yourself." "I think so too." With that, the conversation between the two was cut off. It was Sial Jihu who broke the silence. "Anyways, what did you get?" "Me, you know, what about you?" Kazuki asked back while glossing over the answer. Sial Jihu answered clearly, "Competence." Kazuki's eyes widened and he burst into laughter. "Haha, you're a real piece of work. What kind of wish?" Suddenly, he tilted his head as if something was strange and muttered seriously, "Wait, your reward should have been dissonant, but it doesn't seem like it was." "Right. Can you show it to me?" Sial Jihu shook his head. "I don't have it." "You don't?" "I traded it." Sial Jihu had given up on competence. Kazuki found this hard to believe. I don't know what efficacy it had, but I doubt it was bad. What did you trade it with? Sial Jihu grinned. That's a secret. Kazuki looked as if he had taken a good blow. You didn't tell me either. Kazuki raised both his hands, then walked away with a grin. Seeing Kazuki walk toward the people absorbed in trading, Sial Jihu got up and turned back. He headed to the campsite. Entering the tent, he saw Maria, who had fallen asleep after finishing up with healing the injured, and Hugo, who was sitting with a frown. Seeing Hugo grumbling while holding the battle axe he traded with O'Rahi, Sial Jihu clicked his tongue. That weapon sure is amazing. Sial Jihu knew the reason for Hugo's disgruntled face, although the weapon was flawless in other aspects. PZZZT. Ack. It resisted every time Hugo tried to infuse his mana. According to Kazuki, rarely, there were intelligent weapons that chose their users. In other words, the battle axe was rejecting Hugo's disposition and refusing to accept Hugo as its master. Ehu. Seeing Hugo sigh as if it was the end of the world, Sial Jihu patted his back. Is it still like that? Hugo nodded dejectedly. He had been talking to the axe for the past 4 days, treating it as though it was a divine object, but it seemed that wasn't enough to change the weapon's mind. After grunting hard, Hugo exploded in anger. Fuck, I must be mad doing all this bullshit. Why don't you just trade it away? You never know if someone has a better axe. Plus, there are people who haven't entered yet. Sial Jihu had a point, but Hugo shook his head firmly. No, I'm going to use this. I will. Sial Jihu thought Hugo had given up, but he turned out to be burning with eagerness instead. I mean, isn't it just a hunk of metal at the end of the day? WL. This little bitch wants to choose its master. Since it was born as a weapon, it should be thanking me for wanting to use it. Woong, the battle axe shone fiercely. It seemed to be angry. Huh, this bitch. Hey, you dumbass axe. Do you hate me that much, Woong? Oh, wow. You know, I'm a gentleman when I'm with my partner, but I won't be one with you. Since you can't understand with words, I'll just break you in. Sial Jihu was watching with interest before he started doubting his eyes. Hugo suddenly slammed the axe down and plopped down on it with his dirty butt. He sat cross-legged on it and spoke with a displeased face. This is the last chance. I plan on using you no matter what. You still want to play hard to get? Woong, okay, fine, you better not regret it. Hugo grit his teeth before suddenly shooting his eyes open. He then let out a short, hot, PSH. A bomb detonated. No, that's what Sial Jihu thought before he saw Hugo's butt jump up. Even Maria woke up in a stupor. Wow, what? What happened? With a drowsy face, she turned left and right before sniffing the air. When a foul odor entered her nose, she scowled. Ah, fuck, she screamed before blocking her nose and running out of the tent. Sial Jihu could hear her screaming, "You son of a bitch," while barfing. Haha, she's overreacting. It smells fine to me. Hugo laughed contently while rubbing his butt on the battle axe. How is it? It's shit fart aged for 4 days. Woo-woo-woo-woo-woong. Seeing the battle axe vibrating in horror, Sial Jihu apologized inwardly and quietly entered his sleeping bag. Tomorrow, Stage 2 would end. And perhaps this tiring banquet would come to a close as well. Sial Jihu looked up at the ceiling, then shoved his hand into his pocket. After looking at the item he took out, he grinned. Who would have thought something like this existed? The competence he got had incredible efficacy. Naturally, he had agonized over the decision. But after deliberating for a long time, Sial Jihu chose to trade. He believed this item had much greater value in terms of usefulness. I hope she'll be happy. Reminding himself to visit the Forest of Denial after returning to paradise, Sial Jihu closed his eyes while using the battle axe's screams of despair as a lullaby. The night passed, and the next morning dawned. The participants cleared the 4 remaining attempts instantly. Once they succeeded in clearing the Plaza of Sacrifice 20 times, the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish opened up permanently. Stage 2 had finally come to a close. Chapter 130. Dances with Wolves. Once Stage 2 ended, Sial Jihu relaxed a bit more. With his newfound leisure, he naturally began to grow curious about things he couldn't pay attention to before. Who hosted the banquet? There was a reason the question changed from how the banquet was hosted to who hosted the banquet. Looking back, there were more than one or two suspicious points. The recent exchange was a good example. He thought it would be impossible for everyone to be satisfied with the exchange. Although some might find items they were interested in and successfully trade for them, Seol Jihu believed there would be more than a few who didn't. Of the remaining 100 or so people, he predicted at least half would fail. Yet in reality, almost everyone except 3 or 4 people were able to trade successfully. The rewards Earthlings wanted were limited in scope, to weapons, armor, and such. But everyone's wishes had to be different even by a little. So how could so many people make successful trades? It was almost as if the rewards were designed to be this way. Of course, it could still be a coincidence. After all, there were over 100 people who received rewards. Still, without some sort of an outside force helping to create this situation, it seemed close to impossible. Seol Jihu had a strong hunch that an unknown existence interfered in the matter, and clearly, this existence had to be the host of the banquet. That was how far he went. Just as Ian mentioned, as long as he didn't have a definitive proof, any believable deduction would only be a hypothesis. He felt like he could find clues to confirming his suspicions if he could enter Stage 3, but he didn't know how. Seol Jihu sighed with frustration. Then he went to find a certain priest who was resting. Although conquering the Plaza of Sacrifice became easier as more people returned with the dissonant wish, that didn't mean it suddenly became a walk in the park. As Seol Jihu always fought on the front lines, there were more than a few times when his life was in danger. The person who saved him each time was the priest Kazuki invited. It was common sense for a priest to support a warrior during battle, but Seol Jihu felt like she was paying attention to him to an almost excessive degree. Of course, it was entirely possible that he was mistaken. But if this weren't the case, it didn't make sense for the healing or protective spells to always come in at critical moments. Plus, the priest was suspicious in more than a couple areas. She not wanting to reveal her identity could have been because of a privacy reason, like Kazuki said, but there definitely was something else. A priest's spells weren't infinite. It was normal for a priest to run out of saved spells over successive battles or a prolonged fight. When Maria used her 8 stored spells, she had to restore them by making offerings, and she would pant when she ran out of them after her 16th spell. But this mysterious priest was strange. She poured out one holy spell after another when it came to Seol Jihu, yet she didn't show any sign of running dry of them. And because she used chantless casting, Seol Jihu couldn't pick up any clues from her voice. Everything about her was shrouded in a veil. Solely based on the abilities she had shown, Seol Jihu wouldn't hesitate to believe she was a unique ranker. Suddenly, Seol Jihu remembered the gentle touch from when he lost consciousness during his battle with the Orc champion. Who is she, to be honest? Just who is she to care about me so much? Every time he felt her gaze underneath her hood, she felt like a mother bird worriedly gazing at her child who had just learned to fly. A part of him wanted to rush up to her and pull down her hood. Although it would be incredibly rude, he had a baseless feeling that she would forgive him. Of course, he couldn't bring himself to do such a thing to his benefactor, so he simply expressed his gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of me." In response to Seol Jihu's courteous bow, the robed priest silently nodded her head and reached out as if to stroke his head. Seeing this, Seol Jihu bent down subconsciously. He paused instantly and blinked his eyes. He had subconsciously tried to put his head against her hand. He found it strange how his body reacted automatically. Seol Jihu stared at the priest with a flustered look. Seeing how the priest had retracted her hand and was taking tiny steps back, it seemed she was flustered as well. Hm. She then let out a low cough before turning around. Perhaps uncomfortable with the youth's fixed stare, she made a slight bow before quickly leaving. Seeing the priest getting farther away, Seol Jihu rubbed his chest with a disappointed look. They were only slightly acquainted, so why did he feel so wistful? Seol Jihu didn't know. Once afternoon came around, only half of the participants remained on the field. With the permanent opening of the Plaza of the Dissonant Wish, those who had no reason to stay had left to either Paradise or Stage 3. The Alliance team didn't rush things, as entering Stage 3 wasn't based on a first-come, first-served basis. But because they were tired of the banquet, a part of them wanted to go back to Paradise as soon as possible. Kazuki finished cleaning up the campsite and reminded everyone of what to do after exiting Stage 2. Only then did he bring up leaving through the plaza of the Dissonant Wish. When they walked past the long pathway and the reward room, they finally arrived at their destination, a room with a circular red portal on top of an altar. Kazuki stopped and looked back at the team. I won't say good job yet. Things weren't over until they were out of the banquet. He was reminding them not to let their guards down. In case anyone manages to enter Stage 3, the rest of us will be waiting outside, so don't worry about that. Kazuki furrowed his brows in the middle of his speech. He was bothered by Hugo, who was smirking while stuffing his battle axe into his pants. He had already said the same thing before coming in anyways. Shaking his head, Kazuki turned back. Next, when he entered the portal, he felt his body sink. Splash. The sound of water splashing rang out, and Kazuki immediately realized what had happened. Puha! Spitting out the water and standing tall, just as he expected, he found himself back in the oasis he used to enter Stage 1. He had returned to Paradise. Bitterness shone on his face as he brushed off his soaked hair. 3 times the same, huh? Soon, more splashing rang out. Kazuki turned back and performed a head count. 6 people had entered the red portal. 1, 2. Asu, you're back, Kazuki Hyung Nim. While Kazuki was counting, a familiar voice struck his ears. Sakamoto Jun was waving his hand from outside the oasis. You, Kazuki asked in a fluster, you were alive? Yes, I got eliminated in Stage 1. I thought I'd die while waiting, Sakamoto Jun shouted proudly. Well, it was a good thing he was alive. Kazuki's eyes narrowed. The Alliance team had a total of 7 people, but 2 were missing. No matter how long he waited, they didn't show up. Seol Jihu steeled his mind from the moment he stepped onto the portal. Remembering how it was while entering the banquet, he prepared for impact as soon as his vision turned red. However, the impact he was expecting didn't arrive. Instead, he smelled a somewhat salty air. Seol Jihu's tightly closed eyes opened slowly. When he realized he had been transported to another area, his jaw immediately dropped. He had heard that if he were sent back to Paradise, he would return to the place he entered from. However, the place he was currently in wasn't the Salt Desert's oasis. Moreover, the salty smell in the air carried the scent of the ocean. Immediately raising his spear, he stood alert. He couldn't sense anyone nearby, but he examined the room nervously. Only after carefully scrutinizing the place, several times did he slowly put his spear down. He was in a room with a desk and a bed. Beyond the small window on the wall, he could see an open sea. Realizing that this was probably the mysterious ship signaling the coming of the banquet, Seol Jihu was convinced. He had entered Stage 3 on his first attempt, the same stage Kazuki and Dylan failed to enter twice before. The problem was this. He couldn't find the door out, but as he had experienced something similar in Stage 1, he decided to wait calmly. I read that Stage 3 is a battle royale. He was thinking about all sorts of things when he caught sight of a plate of bread sitting on the table. Even a glass of wine was placed next to it. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't eaten lunch yet. Being a glutton that he was, Seol Jihu rejoiced and reached for the bread before going and retracting his hand. Although it did look tasty, he couldn't just eat something so suspicious. He took out some dried meat from the black belt Teresa had secretly given him. The hunger and thirst he experienced while escaping from the laboratory remained as a trauma, making him develop a habit of bringing ample food and water wherever he went. Tasty. Seol Jihu looked around the cabin room while chewing on the dried meat. Realizing there wasn't anything else, he sat down on the bed and began to wait. How much time passed by, splash, splash, while only the sound of waves crashing against the ship rang out. Click! A familiar sound rang out. A part of the flat wooden walls slightly came apart. It now looked like a revolving door. As he was tired of waiting around, Seol Jihu got up from the bed excitedly. It was then. The door began to spin on its own. When it turned 180 degrees, and the other side of the wall came into his view. Seol Jihu flinched seeing the huge characters written on the wall. He had never seen these characters before. But synchronization seemed to be taking place as they began to wriggle in the next moment. Not long afterwards, the strange characters turned into a recognizable word, and Seol Jihu could easily read what it said. Whoa. Just as he read the word that had turned Korean. Sparkle? The word suddenly shone. Seeing a bright light for an instant, Seol Jihu's eyes dimmed. He looked as if he was entranced, and his arms drooped down as well. Seol Jihu left the cabin room in a daze. Walking like a puppet, he made his way through the dark ship. Opening the door at the end of the corridor, he walked down the staircase that followed. Almost like someone who had his soul sucked out of him, he walked non-stop. It wasn't until he reached the bottom of the staircase that he stopped. Click. Another click rang out and light returned to his dim eyes. Ah! Snapping out of his daze, Seol Jihu blinked multiple times. He felt like he had lost consciousness after reading the character, but he couldn't remember it well. He felt like he had a dream. What happened? Seol Jihu stared at the staircase with a confused look. It looked like he had walked down to the basement, but he couldn't see a door at the end of the staircase. It must have disappeared immediately. The only exit was a door that he could see in front of him. The mysterious power that brought him here was obviously telling him to open it. Despite understanding this, not knowing what was beyond the door made him hesitate. But he obviously couldn't just stand there forever. After hesitating for a long time, Seol Jihu walked toward the door. Taking a deep breath, he pushed his left hand forward. Rousing his mana to activate the blessing of the circum if needed, he slowly pushed the door with his spear. And when he carefully stepped in, zing! A powerful, acute pain struck his brain. Cuke! His eyes widened automatically, and his waist bent back. Struggling from the powerful pain, Seol Jihu clutched his head. It was information. Just like when he experienced synchronization, and just like when he saw the stone steel in Stage 2, new information was being jammed into this brain. And just like always, the pain soon disappeared. But Seol Jihu didn't straighten out his back and stood there, frozen. He was in utter shock at the rules of Stage 3. What? The rules this time weren't as complicated as before, but they were several times more shocking. At that moment, rustling rang out. Seol Jihu raised his head, and 9 doors entered his vision. Including the door he had used to enter, there were 10 in total, and in front of each door was a person groaning while massaging their temples. They seemed to have noticed the situation too, as they looked around the room and fixed their posture. Soon, a total of 10 people gathered in one place.